Have you ever looked at a sleek 3D portfolio and thought, I wish mine could look that good? Well, today is your lucky day. Hi there and welcome to a course in which you'll build a portfolio that could easily get featured on awards, combining stunning 3D animations with a user-friendly layout that'll have recruiters and clients saying, whoa, this guy really knows his stuff. With a minimal yet effective navigation bar, a stunning hero section with a 3D room model, particles, animated text, and a clear call to action, and stylish cards showcasing your experience, projects, and clients. After that, you'll display your project in a clean bento grid layout featuring your best project. Then, there's a unique and animated timeline that visually showcases your career journey. Sleek cards to highlight the technologies you've mastered with interactive 3D icons. A testimonial grid with this cool hover effect. And finally, a functional contact section featuring a form and a computer desk 3D model like you're waiting for an email. And finishing it off with a simple footer at the end. By the end of this course, you'll have a portfolio that not only looks amazing, but loads smoothly, even on mobile, showcasing your skills and experience in a way that's impossible to ignore. And if you're worried this might be too advanced, well, don't worry, because I'll walk you through everything, step by step, from integrating 3D models with Three.js and React 3 Fiber to adding smooth animations with GSAP and building a sleek, modern design with TailwindCSS. So whether you're a beginner looking to level up your portfolio or an experienced developer aiming for the next big opportunity, this video is for you. And alongside this video, I've also put together a handy cheat sheet for Three.js development. You can grab it for free within the video kit in the description below and use it as a quick reference. And if you're looking to deepen your understanding of Three.js and turn it into a career, I recently put together a course focused entirely on vanilla Three.js, from the basics to advanced interactive experiences. You'll get hands-on with live code playgrounds built right into our new platform, allowing you to experience with lighting, animations, and different 3D properties in real time. You'll instantly see the impact of every change, truly learning how Three.js works under the hood. If that sounds helpful, the link is in the description. But with that said, are you ready to build a portfolio that's truly next level? In this course, I won't just show you how to build a portfolio, I'll also teach you how to deploy it to the internet so everyone can see what you've built. Now, a developer portfolio is not like any other project. It is a career asset designed to showcase everything you're capable of, making you an attractive candidate for any job. And that's why I'll teach you how to go a step further. See, hosting your portfolio on a personalized domain makes you more professional, memorable, and improves your credibility and search engine visibility. So, before we dive into coding, let's get that domain name. I highly recommend Hostinger for hosting your modern portfolio. And right now, they're offering a great deal which you don't want to miss. When it comes to hosting this modern portfolio, I personally go for the premium plan. And here's why it's perfect for this and many other projects. You can host 100 websites with the same account. You get a free domain name, which gives you a professional touch. You get a free SSL for HTTPS security, which creates trust with anyone visiting your portfolio. This deal won't last forever, and because I've partnered with Hostinger, you get an even bigger discount. Once you click the link in the description, click Claim Deal, and Add to Cart. Here, we'll have to choose the period of our hosting. With the crazy discount going on right now, I'll definitely choose 48 months to save the most money. And enter your JavaScript Mastery coupon code, which will give you an even bigger discount on your hosting package. And once you buy it, we are ready to set everything up and get started with building out our portfolio. Let's start with Hostinger's guided setup. We are building a new website, so you can choose Create. And we're building a completely custom website, so we can choose Skip at the bottom. Next, we need to choose our domain. As you can see, I use Hostinger for my JSMastery.pro platform. So here you can type out your domain name, I would recommend something like your first name and last name.com. Something like johndoe.com. And if you purchase the hosting for more than 1 year, you'll get the domain completely for free. Choose it and click next. The domain is registering. Now already we are at the next step, or you can choose where your audience is located at, and you can see there's a lot of options. Click next, and the setup will initialize. While that is happening, just another quick note, and that is that the full code base of the video you're about to build is live on GitHub, so you can check it out right here, and if you don't mind, give it a star. With that in mind, we are redirected to the dashboard of our hosting project. So finally, let's code it out, and we'll deploy it at the end of the course. To get started developing our amazing 3D portfolio, we'll start by spinning up our Vite and React project. At this point, I think Vite is the preferred way to start React applications. So just head over to vite.dev, click Get Started, scroll down a bit, and you'll be able to see a command that we have to run. So let me show you how to do that right within your code editor. Or maybe you're using an IDE, like I am. Throughout this course, I'll be using WebStorm, a super powerful IDE that is, as of recently, completely free for non-commercial use, which means that you can just download it and start using all of its amazing features. You can totally proceed with this course with any other code editor, but later on, once you see something cool happening right here inside of my IDE, and it's not happening for you, well, that's most likely WebStorm. So let's open up our integrated terminal and run npm create vite add latest, and then the name of your project. If you're not currently within any kind of a folder, you might want to type 3D portfolio right here. But as I'm currently within a 3D portfolio folder, I'll just say / to create the project in the current repository. And I'll press enter. It'll ask me a couple of questions, such as do I want to install the Create Vite installer, to which I'll say, why, sure, go ahead. And then it's going to ask me a couple of questions. The current directory is not empty. Well, in this case, I'll say remove existing files and continue. You can choose your package name. I'll just say 3D portfolio. And then you'll need to choose a framework or a flavor of your application. You can totally proceed with any option from the list, but throughout this course, I'll go with React. And I'll go for the JavaScript variant. But of course, if you want to do it in TypeScript, you're totally free to do so. That's it. Simply run npm install to install all the necessary dependencies to run our React application. And once that is done, run npm run dev to spin up the project on localhost 5173. And then just click on it to open it up within your browser. You should be able to see something that looks like this. But now let's clean up our file and folder structure a bit so everything makes a bit more sense for the build of our 3D portfolio. I'll start by diving into the source folder, removing all the assets we have right now, removing the app CSS, as well as app.jsx. We'll create all of these on our own. And you'll want to clean up your index.css as we'll update it later on. Now, to actually show something on the screen, we have to create a new app.jsx, and within it, run rafce to quickly create a new functional component. That'll look something like this. If rafce didn't work for you, that might mean that you don't have the necessary extension or a plugin installed. So go to your editor's settings, either plugins or extensions, and search for React snippets. In this case, I'm using modern React snippets, but any should do the trick. Once you do that, we can remove this import as it's not necessary, and we can wrap everything within a main tag. Within it, we can render a div, and within this div, we can render an h1 that'll say something like, welcome to my 3D portfolio. Perfect. And if you go back to your application, you should be able to see something that looks like, oh wait, that's too light of a screen. We were looking at a dark screen for such a long time, so sorry for flashing you with this light screen. But it is what it is. We'll switch it over to dark mode very soon. For now, the most important part is that you can actually see this empty canvas, which throughout the period of this course, together will turn into your 3D portfolio. But to do it, we'll need some packages or dependencies that'll help us work with 3D. So open up your terminal one more time and actually open up another one. This one will keep running our application and the second one we'll use for installing those additional dependencies. So run npm install, and now we can list out all the packages and dependencies we'll be using. Let's start with GSAP. So what is GSAP? Well, if you head over to gsap.com, you'll be able to see that it says Animate Anything, a widely robust JavaScript animation library built for professionals. It allows you to effortlessly animate anything that JS can touch, delivering silky smooth performance and unmatched support. Okay, I think they're trying to be a bit flashy right here and show you everything that you can do with GSAP right here on this landing page. And I gotta say, it's looking great. There's a showcase of many different projects that people have built over the years. And who knows, maybe your portfolio ends up right here. So let's install it by installing GSAP as well as gsap/React. Now, after installing our animations library, which we'll use to animate specific parts of our portfolio, you'll also want to install Three.js, a library for creating WebGL-powered 3D scenes inside of your browser. If you are super new to Three.js, I would recommend checking out our free YouTube crash course before proceeding with this course, or even checking out our vanilla Three.js course on JS Mastery Pro. If you check out the terminal, you'll see we dive super deep into everything that Three.js offers, starting from things like cameras and orbiting different models, all the way to transforming and moving your objects, to adding meshes and geometries, managing it all through a graphical user interface, and of course, Lightning and so much more, because we're continuously adding new content to this course. But with that said, let's add Three, as well as at React-3/Fiber. Fiber is a React version of Three.js that simplifies the use of Three.js library within a React ecosystem. And also, on top of that, there is a package called React3/Dray. It is a helper library that even further simplifies the most common 3D tasks like lighting, loaders, and more. Finally, for some scenes, we'll also need some visual effects like bloom and so on. So I'll say add React-3/post-processing. I'll explain how all of that works pretty soon. For now, let's just get them installed by pressing the Enter key. And with that, our first step is done. You have successfully created a React application with an empty page that right now looks something like this. And you have installed all the necessary packages. There aren't many. They're going to help you develop your 3D portfolio. Great work. So what'd you say that we go from something that looks like this to something that looks a bit more like that? Well, to achieve that, we need a way to apply styling to our application. And for styling, we'll use TailwindCSS, which allows you to rapidly build modern websites without ever leaving your HTML. In other words, it's a utility-first CSS framework packed with utility classes for easy, but fully customizable styling, something that Material UI, Bootstrap, or other styling component libraries don't do very well, which is customization. Here, you're writing Tailwind, which is technically still just CSS, but in a much faster way. So let's go ahead and set it up. Head over to Docs, Installation using Vite, and just copy this first command right here and paste it into our second terminal, npm install TailwindCSS and add TailwindCSS/Vite. After that, we'll have to go over the second step, which is to configure the Vite plugin by adding TailwindCSS Vite plugin to our Vite configuration. So just copy this entire block of code, navigate over to Vite config. By the way, I just pressed Command P, which allowed me to quickly open up the file explorer and navigate to this file without ever having to search for it right here. So that is Command P. And now you can simply paste what you just copied, where now we're setting the TailwindCSS plugin. And we also need to keep the previous plugin that we had, which was React. That looks something like this. And we have to import this React from @vite.js/plugin-react. Perfect. Now, the third step is to add an import to our CSS file that imports TailwindCSS. So copy this and paste it right at the top of our index.css file. Add import TailwindCSS, and here we can also define the base styles, like the styles for our HTML and body elements, and give it a width of something like 100 VW, which stands for viewport width. We can also give it a background color of black, and we can also give it a color of white. If you save this and go back, you should be able to see something that looks like this. Welcome to my 3D portfolio, now with a dark background and light text. Now in TailwindCSS v4 and beyond, we now have the native support for @theme directive, which allows you to define some global styles for fonts or colors right within the index.css without having to have a separate tailwind.config.js file. So here you can do something like theme --color -white -50, and you can define a specific value like hash D9ECFF. This is a different variation of the white color, and instead of specifying it every single time, D9ECFF, now you can just say color white 50. But where did this color come from in the first place? Why did I use this specific color? Well, alongside watching this course, I'll also give you access to the entire code base of the course in case you want to just look at the code. But more importantly, I'll give you full and free access to the finalized Figma design. So in case you want to check it out and try to attempt developing it on your own, or you want to change some things up, well, you can do that by checking out the final Figma design. The link to the video kit containing everything you need for this video, such as the source code, the Figma design, and additional assets and snippets, is right below this course. So just click on it, get to the video kit, and then go to the Figma design. From within the design, if you inspect specific elements of text, you'll see different colors, such as this button, for example, that has this silver color, or this one right here. You can see D9ECFF. This is the exact color that I have added to my Tailwind config. So what you can do next is go through the entire Figma design and manually apply all of these colors, such as, for example, --color -blue -100, which is hash 2D2D38. And then you can also add all of the other colors as well. Alongside the theming functionalities, you can also add the custom utility classes using Tailwind's layer feature. So you can say add layer, utilities, and then you can define, for example, a .flex-center class name. Why flex center? Because so often we need to center something within a div, right? So instead of every time saying flex, center, center, here you can just define that this flex center will apply a property of flex, a justify center, and items-center. So when you want to use it within the code, it is super simple. You just say flex center. And there are many other ways in which we can use this new Tailwind configuration to make our life much easier later on. So just so you don't have to go over to our design and poke every single element 10 times until you get to its color, I'll provide the final index.css file for you right at the bottom of this video kit. So head over there and copy the index.css file. Once you copy it, override everything we wrote here and simply paste it. You'll notice that here we add some additional elements that are going to help us style our application, as well as some basic elements for defining different grids, responsiveness, and utility functions, as well as, most importantly, theming, and we're adding our own font as well from Google Fonts. This doesn't contain any programming logic or Three.js code. Rather, it's just some utility classes that'll make the styling of our application easier. Whenever there's something we're using within our code, I'll point your attention to it. For example, take a look at these components. This layer of components is used to define custom styles scoped to real components. This keeps things modular. For example, if you search for something like a navbar right here, you can see that as soon as we apply class name of navbar, it's going to apply these classes right here to make it look nice. And you can also immediately style the logo within the nav, or even how list items within it look like. These styles act like reusable building blocks across the app. Think of this as the design system layer, where you store the visual identity of the buttons, layouts, grids, and more. Don't worry, I'm gonna explain how it all works very soon. And the only thing you'll need other than the styles are gonna be the assets. Yep, these little icons that you can see here, 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 even here. I wanna make sure that you have everything you need to continue developing this application without going back and forth with the design. So I've took the time and put all of these icons in a single zipped folder. Head over to the video kit and find it right here. Once you download it, head over to your current application and delete the current public folder. Unzip the folder you just downloaded and drag and drop this new public folder right within your application. This one will contain a lot of images, logos, and textures, as well as different 3D models we'll use throughout our application. With that said, let's test whether our Tailwind CSS configuration works. I'll pull my browser to the side so we can see it alongside our IDE, and I'll open up the source app.jsx, and I'll apply a class name of text-3xl. If you do that, and if your text gets larger, or if you maybe apply an underline, that means that Tailwind is properly connected to your application. And with that, we are ready to start working on the hero section. So let's do that next. The portfolio hero section. The first thing that your users see and a major chance to make a first impression. Here, we'll start strong by immediately blending some UI elements, scroll-based interactivity on the Navbar, and a real-time 3D canvas. So let me start by breaking it down into two major parts. First, the JSX structure and the layout, and then, of course, the GSAP animations and interactivity. First things first, we have to organize our projects into sections and components. So let me clean up this app.jsx and organize our project. We can start by creating a components folder right within the source folder. I'll call it components, and I'll also create another, which I'll call sections. Next, head over into sections and create a new file called hero.jsx and run rafce. And then import it within your app.jsx. That'll look something like this. We have our app. We can wrap it just in an empty React fragment for now and render a self-closing hero section just like this, but make sure to import it from sections hero.jsx. If you do that, you should be able to see just the hero right here on the right. But now we can start diving deeper into that hero section by creating our hero section layout. First, we'll start with some semantic HTML by turning this div into a section. We can give this section an ID so we can later on scroll to it of hero and a class name of relative and overflow-hidden. Inside of it, we can create a div that'll have a class name of absolute, top-0, left-0, and a z index of 10. What is this for? Well, for a little background element that I want to show near the top left of the screen. So let me render a self-closing image tag with a source of /images/bg.png with an alt tag of background. If you save it, you won't be able to see anything yet, but soon enough, the goal is to show these little dots right here floating on top left of the screen. So right below this div, let's set up our main layout by creating a div with a class name equal to hero-layout. On the left side, we will display our hero content, meaning the text. And on the right side, we'll display the 3D model. So start by creating a semantic header tag with a class name of flex, flex-call, justify-center. On medium devices, w-full, so it takes full screen, w-screen, and on medium devices, padding x of 20 and padding x of 5 usually. This is to make sure that it looks good on mobile devices as well. And now you can start seeing that background appear right here. Within it, we can display a div that'll have a class name equal to flex, flex-call, and a gap of 7. And now we can focus on the main headline. Yep, this is the one that I'm talking about. It'll actually be comprised of 3 different H1 elements. So let's first start by creating a new div for it. It'll have a class name of hero-text. And then here we can create our first h1 of shaping. Below it, we can say into real projects. And below it, we can say that deliver results. But we're shaping what? But what are we shaping? Well, if you take a look at the final application, you'll see that here we'll have animated text that says ideas, code, designs, concepts, and more. So for now, let's just use one of these. For example, designs. And later on, I'll show you how we can make it animated. First, we need to define some kind of an array that we want to loop over. We might as well define it here by saying const words is equal to an array of different objects, and each word has to have a text, for example, ideas, and then we also have to give it an image path because each word will also have a little icon that you can see alongside that word. So let's give it an image path of /images/ideas.svg. And you can do the same thing with the second one, which is going to be concepts. And here you can say concepts.svg. Perfect. So now I'm going to zoom this out so it seems more like a real application. And I want to figure out how we can animate it. Well, first of all, let's map over those words right here. So after the word shaping, instead of designs, I'll open up a new span element. It'll look like this. A span with a class name equal to slide. Within it, another span with a class name equal to wrapper. And within it, we want to map over our words by saying words.map, where we get each individual word. And for each word, we want to automatically return a span. Now, what do I mean when I say automatically return? I mean not open up a curly brace here, rather just open up a parenthesis, because that means an immediate return. This span, since we're mapping over it, has to have a key of something like word.text, because each text is unique, and a class name of flex, items-center, on medium devices a gap of 3, typically a gap of 1, and a padding bottom of 2, just to create some spacing. Finally, within that span, we can render an image for the icon. It'll have a source of word.img path. It'll have an alt tag of word.text, and it'll have a class name of on extra large devices, size of 12, on medium devices, size of 10, and typically a size of 7, so it looks good on all different screen sizes. On medium devices, we can also give it some padding of 2, typically a padding of 1, rounded dash full, so it sits within a circle, with a BG white of 50. So if I save this, you can now see 2 different icons that are animating up and down. And of course, alongside the icon, right below it, I want to display another span element that'll simply render the word.text. So now it says ideas, and it animates over to concepts. But keeping this list of different words right here on top is not that ideal. Because what if we want to have not just 2 different words, but rather 5, 6, or 10? It doesn't make sense to clutter the view of the hero with some data points. And as a matter of fact, if you wanted somebody to very easily be able to update this, it doesn't make sense to keep it here. It's better to extract all static data into a standalone file, typically called constants, which contains nothing more than just some data that we want to use across our application. So let's copy these words, and instead of keeping them here, let's create a new file within the source folder, or rather a new folder called constants, and within constants create a new file called index.js. Within it, paste those words and make sure to export them by saying export const words. And now, when using those words, you can import them over from the constants. Everything still works as it did, but now we have just a single import at the top. And now, if you wanted to provide more words right here, you can do that easily. As a matter of fact, we can add or shape concepts, designs, code, ideas, and I went ahead and duplicated it right here just so we have more things to scroll over in a more dynamic way. And then when it reaches the end, it'll very nicely scroll all the way to the first one. There we go. Super nice, right? So throughout this application, there's going to be more cases where we want to have some static code, like arrays of different data that we want to use. And you can find those at the bottom of the video kit as well. Just copy the constants index.js file and just paste it here. You'll notice that we have different words, but then also you can change your abilities, for example. What are your strengths? And descriptions of those strengths. Which different images do we want to import? Maybe you can also change different navigation links. It is all right here. So now that we have that, I want to take a second to explain how this animation works. See, this span has a class name of slide, and then a span inside of it has a class name of wrapper. These classes are defined within the index.css file. So if you command click them, I think this should lead you directly to where they're mentioned, or you can just find them within the index.css. And here you can see that we're defining the display of the entire block as inline block. We set the direction of column, and then we start a transition. The key part right here is this keyframes word slider, where we're translating the Y position of the different words right here, such as designs, code, and so on, first by a little, then more, and then we finally fully transform it. And then we animate it over a specific number of seconds infinitely. This subtle yet powerful micro interaction brings life to your main headline and immediately communicates what you do, both visually and interactively. And then below this slide with the wrapper, H1, we can also add a p tag that can say something like, "Hi, I'm Adrian, a developer based in Croatia with a passion for code." Of course, you can type something different. Make sure to give this p tag a class name of text-white50, on medium devices text-xl, relative a z of 10, and pointer events none to make it non-clickable. And of course, this was supposed to be outside of the H1, not just the first one, but all of them. So I'll post it right below this div that says hero text. There we go. Much better. Finally, below this, we want to create some kind of a call to action where people can click on a button, and then that button leads us to our work. This button will be reused many times throughout our application, so it makes most sense to create a reusable button component. So back in our application, let's head over into the components folder and create our first component called button.jsx. This button will be used across multiple sections, both in the hero and context section, so let's make it fully reusable and dynamic. I'll run rafce to quickly spin up our functional component, and then within it, we can make this button an anchor tag. This anchor tag will have a class name, which will be equal to CTA-wrapper. CTA stands for call to action, which means an action that you want your user to take. Before I continue developing this button, let's actually use it within our hero section. So right below this p tag, I will render our button. Make sure to import it at the top. And then within this anchor tag, I can create a div with a class name equal to CTA group and group. And within it, we can render another div, this time a self-closing one, with a class name of bg-circle. Next, below it, we can render a p tag with a class name of text, and we can simply render something that button should say, like see my work. And there we go. See my work is right here. Below it, let's also render a div with a class name equal to arrow-wrapper, and let's render an image with a source of /arrow-down.svg with an alt tag of arrow. We cannot see it yet, and that's because we have to style it a bit better. So from the hero section, let's pass some props that allow us to style it. I'll pass over a class name equal to, on medium devices W of 80, on medium devices H of 16, typically W60, and H of 12. And why do we have to provide the class name as a prop and not immediately right here? Well, that's because this button is going to be used in different scenarios, and depending on where it's being used, we want to provide some different class names. We can also give it an ID of a button, and we can provide a text, such as see my work, because in the contact section, it's going to say something else. So now we can head over into that button and destructure those props that we're passing into it, such as the text, the class name, and the ID. Next, we can make this first class name dynamic. I'll delete it and make it dynamic by opening up a new dynamic block of code and a template string. I'll say if a class name exists, so class name and then question mark, else render an empty string. What does this mean? If a class name exists, render it. If it doesn't, render an empty string, and then always render a CTA wrapper. Finally, here, instead of see my work, we can render the text. And in this case, the class name here should have been CTA button instead of a CTA group, which will activate those classes. If you head over to that, you'll see that it'll apply some padding, both horizontal and vertical. It'll round the corners a bit, apply a dark background. But hey, if it's dark, why is it white right now? Well, that's because we also have a transition. So as you hover over it, you can see that the background turns dark and only the arrow jumps up and down. That happens because of these inner classes such as BG Circle and the arrow wrapper. So with that in mind, our button is fully styled, and later on, once we implement a couple more sections, we'll actually make it scroll to the sections just below. Now we can get back to the hero section and see what we have right now. We have been working on the header component, which is actually just the left part of the hero content section. Or if you're looking at it on a mobile device, that is this top part. But now is the time to fill in this huge gap on the right side. And we can do that by introducing this great 3D room model. So let's do that in the next lesson. To start adding our great 3D model right below or to the right side of the text, we can head back over into the hero section and we'll implement it right here below the header, where it says right side 3D model. I wouldn't even call this a model. It's actually an entire 3D experience. So let's go ahead and create this component. Right within source, components, create a new folder and call it hero models. Within hero models, create a new file and call it hero experience.jsx. Just run RAFCE for now. Later on, we'll implement the entire experience here, but for now, import it right here where it says 3D model by putting it in a figure. Figure is an HTML5 semantic tag that says that something important will be right here, and it is self-contained, meaning it is a single unit that we want to display. Within it, we can render a div that'll have a class name equal to hero-3d-layout. This will give it 70% of the width of the screen on large devices or full width on smaller devices. So if I head back right here and give this a border red of 200 and border -2, you should be able to see that it takes full width of the screen. But if we expand it, it's taking about 70% of the screen right here, which is still a lot to show this model. So right within it, let's render this self-closing hero experience. This component is absolutely positioned, so you can see it jumps a bit over here. But as we implement it, it's gonna jump right below. So let's head over into it. And here we have to render our GLB model. So what is a GLB model? Well, a GLB is a file format that allows us to render 3D scenes and models. You can find many of these models on websites like Sketchfab. Some of these are free and some of them are paid, and you can easily download them and put them right within your application. But let's take it slow. First things first, I want to set up a canvas because in Three.js, everything begins with a canvas. So instead of a div, let me render a canvas, which I have to import from React 3 Fiber, and we have to have a camera within that canvas. So I'll say camera is equal to, and then we can set the position of the camera to an array of something like 0 on the x-axis, 0 on the y-axis, and about 15 on the z-axis, which is pulled back a bit, allowing us to frame the model nicely. We can also give it something known as an FOV, or field of view, of 45, allowing us to once again nicely frame it within our camera. And of course, we cannot yet see anything if we don't have a light. So let me add an ambient light, which is a self-closing component, with an intensity of something like 0.2. And we can also add a color to this light, such as hash 1A1 A40. If you save this, you won't be able to see anything just yet. Why? Well, because there's nothing to see. There's just light. So to see something within the canvas, you need to add a 3D object, such as a mesh with a geometry and a material. Well, here's an example of adding a simple box. You can create a new mesh, and then within it, you can render a box geometry with args, an array of 1, 1, 1, which is how wide and how big it is. And then you can also give this mesh some kind of material, such as mesh standard material, and make it a color of something like blue. If you do this and save, you still won't be able to see it, and that's because we have to properly light our subject. Ambient light in this case is not enough, so let me add a directional light with a position of something like 5, 5, 5, and an intensity of 1. If you do that, you should be able to see a blue, or let's make it teal, box. Pretty cool, right? But right now, it's just a 2D box. So how can we actually move it around to see it in all of its 3 dimensions? Well, we can add something known as orbit controls, allowing us to move around this 3D model. I'll add it right here above the mesh by calling it orbit controls, coming from React.js. It is a self-closing component, and if you just call it like this, you'll already be able to move this box in all different dimensions, and you can even zoom it in, as you can see. Currently, only some sides are lit up, while the others are not. You can play with the intensity of the light to see how that changes the model. And of course, this is something we dive much deeper into within our vanilla Three.js course, so I just had to show this to you. We go super deep into different types of lights that there are, and then, check this out, you can see exactly what each Three.js property is doing right here within the lesson. I mean, just how cool is that? You can play with the intensity of different point lights, change the positions of the lights, and even change the rotations. We have a second point light. You can see how it gets reflected on different elements. Pretty cool stuff, right? And right now we are dealing with a directional light. We dive a bit deeper into the power property, and check this out. At the end, you can also practice your knowledge using a quiz. Pretty cool, right? And if something's not clear, you can ask questions right here within the comment system, and I'll reply very soon. But with that said, let's actually make something out of this cube. Or rather, should I say, we need to import our real 3D model here. But before, let's first play a bit with the orbit controls. I will set the enable pan to be set to false, which is going to prevent panning the scene. So you can only zoom in and zoom out, as well as move around. Also, I want to enable the zoom only if we're on desktop devices. But if we're on tablet, then I want to disable it because it's going to prevent the users to be able to scroll throughout the website. So I'll create a dummy variable called isTablet, and I'll make it equal to false for now. So here we can say if not isTablet, then enable zoom, else disable it. Of course, very soon we'll have to make this work for real. But for now, we're good. After that, we can define the max distance that we can zoom out. I'll set it to 20, as well as min distance. And I'll set that to about 5. We can also set the min polar angle to math.pi over 5, and a max polar angle to math.pi over 2. This allows us to control where in the screen we can move. For example, we can move up to this point up. We cannot have a full view down and a full view up in the room. We can only look at it from this angle. And that's exactly what these polar angles are doing. While we're here, let's also implement this isTablet functionality for real. And for that, we'll use a library called React Responsive. So I'll simply run npm I react-responsive to install it. And this will allow us to ensure that on larger devices, users can rotate and zoom, while mobile and tablet users will get a bit of a simpler experience. Using this library is super simple. You just have to say isTablet is equal to useMediaQuery, and then you pass a query you want to validate for, such as max width of 768 pixels, like this. And then for the other one, we can maybe define isMobile. IsMobile will be max width about, I think 768, and actually tablet is 124, like this. So now we have this real isTablet variable. But now is the time that instead of this fake cube, which you can see now we cannot zoom on mobile devices, which allows us to then move up and down normally as we would on any other website. But if I zoom in on desktop, that still works. So now the main goal is that instead of this cube, we actually render this full 3D model. While I was creating the design for this amazing 3D portfolio, I was thinking for a long time, which model should we use? I went through many different iterations, but ultimately ended up on this one. It is a developer-like room. It has a lamp, a PC, a robot vacuum, a chair, and 2 screens. Pretty nice. It's also not super realistic. It has a nice artistic look, a bit of gloom from these monitors shining away, and it just feels like a developer's room, right? Which you want to put on your portfolio. But of course, you're completely free to search any 3D model you want. Sketchfab is one of the better websites. So for example, you can search for a laptop or a MacBook model. There we go. And there are many cool ones that you can use and display in the hero of your application. But as I said, I really like this one, and I think you will too. So let me show you what the process is of using some of these models in your apps. You could totally go ahead and download it right here. After you log in, it'll just give you a GLB file, and then you would be able to import it within your application. But here's the thing. Some of these models are super large. For example, the GLB file is 1 megabyte large. And even though that is not so big, it has 33,000 triangles, which makes it take some time to load. And that is without the lights that we need to display on it. So what I did is I didn't want to use this model directly. Rather, I asked my friend that knows a bit of Blender for 3D modeling to clean up unnecessary meshes, hidden geometries, and parts that we just didn't need on the screen. This allowed us to reduce the number of triangles while still preserving the original detail, and they also grouped some parts together so it's easier for us to name them and manage them within the code. And she's actually teaching me those Blender optimization techniques so I can cover them within the Elite Three.js course, which will release soon on the platform. But for now, just so you don't have to go through that process yourself, I decided to give you already optimized models right here within the public folder. So remember putting this here before? If you go into models, you'll see an optimized room.glb. This is the model you want to use. Now, to be able to use any kind of a GLB model, you need to first convert it to JSX by using the gltf JSX package. It is a very simple package that turns gltf files into JSX components. It is super simple to use. Let me show you. I'll open up my terminal and actually open up a new one. Within this one, I will cd into /public/models. So now I'm in the same folder where we have all of these models we'll end up using. The only thing you have to do is run npx gltf JSX optimized-room.glb and press enter. It's asking you whether you want to install that package, so say yes or just Y, and this will create a clean optimized-room.jsx file for you containing the scene hierarchy that we can directly import and render within our React 3 Fiber project. Here it is, optimized-room.jsx. So simply move this file over to Source, Components, Hero Models, and put it here, right next to the Hero Experience. Then head over into the optimized room and rename the file to something like room. You can also change it right here at the top, export function room. And this was auto-generated by GLTF to JSX. Pretty cool, right? So what is this? Well, this is a JSX representation of this 3D model. It has different meshes and geometries that we can use, and all of that together will form that room. Just make sure to point it to the right file. Currently, it's pointing to optimized room GLB, but you'll have to point it to /models/optimized room GLB, and you'll have to prepend that word models right here as well, because if you check out our file and folder structure, you'll see it's within public, models, and then optimized room. Great. Now let's import this model into our Hero experience. I'll head over to that component, and instead of just rendering a mesh, a box geometry, we can render this room. So I'll render a self-closing room component coming from components room. And if I save it, check this out. Even on mobile, you cannot really zoom in and out, and right now it's not positioned in the best way possible, but you already get the idea for what this is. In my case, it is a heavily lit room, like there is a sun shining right here from the middle of the room. The more directional light intensity you add, the brighter it'll be and the less you'll see the colors. But if you reduce it, for example, already it'll start looking so much better. Now, what do you say that we more properly position this model on our screen? So instead of just rendering the room itself, I'll render it inside of a group, which then allows us to adjust different things, such as the scale of the room. So I can say that if we are on mobile devices, then the scale will be 0.7 times the original size, else it'll be the full size. So now the model will be a bit easier to handle on mobile devices. We can also change the position, where we can make it 0 on the x-axis, minus 3.5 on y-axis, and 0 on the z-axis to move it down a bit. There we go. This makes more sense. And we can also change the rotation a tiny bit by making it equal to 0 minus math.pi over 4, and then 0 on the z-axis. This will rotate it slightly. So once you first open it up, it should look something like this, nicely positioned within your mobile screen. Currently, our lights are totally off, but don't worry, we're gonna fix it soon. Before that, check it out on desktop. Looking great? Well, soon enough, it'll look great. Lights truly do make a big difference when working with 3D models. So let there be light. Instead of simply adding lights one by one like this, we can actually create a new component within the Hero models, and I'll call it Hero Lights.jsx. Run RAFCE, and then simply add the lights right within this empty React fragment. For now, I will simply use the same two lights that we had here. So if I copy them and remove them from here, save. Oh, just the screens will light. This is pretty cool because they emitted their own light. But I'll put those right here, ambient and directional. And now I will import the Hero Lights right above this group. And you can see we have light again. So now we can head into the Hero Lights and start implementing all the different lights that we want to have in our application. You might think that there are not many lights right here, but the more you think about it, the more lights you'll see. I'll increase the width of my browser a bit so we can see it a bit better. Let's start by removing those two lights and add a spotlight, just like this. Make sure to spell the L in spotlight uppercase. And let's give it a position. This one will be the front right spotlight, which is going to mimic a strong key light, like the desk lamp that we have right here. So I'll position it on 2, 5, 6, and you might want to play with this a bit just to make sure to get it right. And let's of course give it some kind of intensity. I'll make it very strong, like 100. And now you can see that it's coming from the top right, but if you play with these values a bit, like 222, you'll see how strong it is right now. Or we can make it come from the center of the screen, 0, 0, 0. You can't see anything then, but then if you change it to 1, 1, 1, you can see how well it is lighting everything. As you move the numbers a bit, like 135 or maybe 145, or maybe you make it this 2, you can see how this light behaves. For now, I'll set it to 2, 5, 6. There we go. This is already looking so much better. We can also angle the spotlight a bit to maybe something like 0.15. And check this out. Get what I was saying? We are really talking about a desk lamp light right here. Yep, you can go to that level of detail where only a small part of the model is visible. There's also this interesting property called penumbra, which basically means the softness around the edges of that light. And you can change the color of the light to something like white. There we go. Now let's add an overhead lamp. I'll copy this initial light, change the position to 4, 5, 4, change the angle to 0.3, the intensity to about 40, we don't need it to be that strong, penumbra to about 0.5, and we can give it a bit of a cool blue tone. Let's say that we have some colored LEDs, something like 4cc0f0, and now we're lighting this larger part of the screen as well. Let's add another one. And I mean, you can play with this as much as you'd like. We could have been totally happy with what I had initially with just one directional light, but I want to really create the mood, if you know what I mean. Next one, we'll have -3, 5, and 5. There we go. So now you can notice how these lights start overlapping. With an angle of 0.4, we can give it a super soft edge of just 1, intensity to about 60, and a color of like 9D4EDD, which is going to give it a bit of a different tone. And now I want to add another type of light. This one will be defined as primitive because within primitive, you can provide any kind of an object here, which will be a new 3.rect area light. So this is a special type of light that provides a soft and moody fill light. You can also provide it a color like A259FF. I found that one to work pretty well. Oh, and here I forgot to pass a hash, so the color wasn't actually getting applied. So if I comment out this primitive light, just so you can see what was happening, this is looking so much more interesting than before, right? So now we have this super white light. We have this bluish spotlight right here. And then we also have this purplish spotlight at the right side. And now we're adding this additional rect area light. To be able to use it, you have to first import at the top. So I'll say import asterisk as 3 from 3. And this allows you to use different elements from the library. Of course, this lights up everything a bit too much, but you get what I'm going for, right? We can change its position to about 0, 1, 0, and we need to change this intensity to 15. And the rotation is the most important part. We want to angle it down toward the scene. So I'll change the rotation to minus math.pi over 4, math.pi over 4, and then 0 for the z-axis. It's also important what else you pass into this rect area light. See, the second property it takes in is the intensity, and then the width and the height. So alongside the color, I'm going to provide 8 as the intensity to this rect area light, 3 as the width, and 2 as the height. So that's going to angle it a bit more toward the room. Finally, I want to add a point light, which is going to be very subtle and scattered for color balance. So I'll simply give it a position of 0, 1, 0. So it's going to be on the center side, but a bit lower, with an intensity of 10 and a color of hash 720 9B7. I found that color to work Very well. And I'll add another point light right below it by duplicating this one. This one will come from behind or off to the right. So that's going to be 1, 2, and -2 with an intensity of 10 and a deep blue color like 0D00A4. So now the lighting in this room looks pretty crazy, doesn't it? I think one thing we can do to tone it down a bit is properly position this rectangular light by changing the position to come from the front right side. So on x-axis 1, a bit from the top, so y-axis 3, and then 4 from the z-axis. You can see this now fills the room a bit nicer. And maybe the most important thing that I missed is the softness around the edges of the light. Even though I thought I applied it, you can see that these lights seem to be fighting with each other, one overlapping with the other. And while it's pretty cool to see that you can test color theory by applying different colored lights over the same surface area, we don't want it in our application. So when I said penumbra here, I was actually missing an M. So if you add it here, you'll notice how this light will get much softer and it won't compete with the rest of the lights. Same thing for all the other two spotlights. Yeah, I think the glow of the lamp shows it the best because it has such a high intensity. Check this out. If I change the value of that property to nothing, so it doesn't exist, it'll have a very sharp light. But if I change the value, it'll soften it and more and more and more until it becomes barely noticeable, but it is still there. In this case, lamps really do emit some light, so I want to leave it right here. Pretty cool stuff, right? But now everything still seems a bit too purplish or bluish, doesn't it? It doesn't seem like your real room. It doesn't have that same artistic style that the original model had. So let's go outside of the lights for a bit, and let's go back to the room model to see whether we can fix some of these meshes, materials, and geometries. I want to replace some of these default materials with the ones we're going to custom define that better react to light. That way we'll have more control. For example, a Fong material, that's F-O-N-G, is great for soft shading with subtle highlights, whereas the standard material is great for realistic lighting and reflections. So depending on what we want to achieve, we can apply a different material to different meshes. The way it works is like this. You can first import something known as use texture by saying const matcap texture is equal to use texture coming from React.js. And here you can define where that texture is coming from. In this case, we can go to /images /textures /mat1.png. And if you try to take a look at this mat1 image, you should be able to find it under images, textures, mat1, and it should look something like this. We'll use it for some meshes right here, and you'll soon see how that'll look like. So just to show you a simple example, I'll say const curtain material and make it equal to a new 3.mesh Fong material. And to it, you can pass a color of hash D90429 as an example. And don't forget to import everything as 3 from 3 to be able to use these materials. Now we can put that curtain material to use. For example, in this first mesh geometry where it says materials blend 1, you can use the curtain material and see what difference does it make. Currently, we haven't applied it properly, which is actually good because you can see how this mesh looks like without any material. Super plain, right? But as soon as I properly fix this color right here by removing this space, you can see that we have a completely different story. We get a much more vibrant color that reacts to light a bit differently. So this right here is the material that we had before, blend 1. Okay, pretty cool, but a bit plain. And then this is our new curtain material, which is nothing special. It is just a basic built-in Three.js mesh Fong material with a bright, vibrant color. And I know this might seem like a lot because we're diving into adding so many different sorts of lights to make this room super unique, because let's be honest, light is what allows you to see the room in the first place. So we tackled spotlights, primitives with the rect area lights, point lights, and more. And now we're even changing the original materials of some meshes right here. The one that's going to make the biggest difference for sure has to be this texture that we're importing from a PNG. Yep, you can import a texture from a PNG image. Let me show you how. I'll say const body material and make it equal to a new 3.mesh Fong material, to which I will pass a map. So instead of a color, you can pass a map, and I'll pass it as the matte cap texture that I defined above from image. And now we can apply this body material right here to this second mesh. Instead of materials blend, I'll apply a body material and see if you can notice the difference. It's the walls. See how the walls react differently to lights depending on which materials we give it? This is cool, sure, but this definitely makes it look a bit different, if that's what you're going for. Now, just so you don't have to go ahead and update every single material with its own color, it is like being a bit of an artist, right? Changing the colors. I'll provide you with the final room.jsx file right within the video kit. So head over here at the bottom of the file and copy it, room.jsx. If you paste it, you'll notice that we're leaving some materials as blend, some like the table we're changing, and then some more like the radiator, pillow material, maybe even something like the chair or the computer. That's what we need to change. So if I save this now and reload, we get something that looks a bit more like this. It's much closer to the final effect that we were going for. I just felt that this works with the original theme of the portfolio that we're going for. Oh, and notice one cool thing, and that is that these monitors now have this some kind of a glow. And that in the world of Three.js is called a selective bloom. So I can change the intensity of that bloom and you'll notice how much stronger it'll be. It like the light bleeds out. So I found the value of 1.5 to work the best. So it seems like they're shining too bright to be able to see what's on them. Now, if you reload the page on your desktop device, you'll see the full 3D experience. We have what appears to be a super moody room where a lot of vibe coding happens. But once again, I invite you to play with the lights a bit. Every change that you make makes a big difference to the final model. And in the final app, I even added some particles, but to be honest, I think that's a bit too much because snow or particles don't really fall within a room, right? But if you do want to add them, I'll leave it right at the bottom of the video kit. The only thing you have to do is create a new component within the hero models, call it particles.jsx, paste that code right here, and then get back over to your hero experience. And then right below the lights, you can render the particles and pass the count of how many particles you'd like. I'll set it to about 100 and see the magic happen. If you want to really freeze your computer, set it to 1,000 and see what happens. There we go. That's a sky full of stars if I've ever seen one. Pretty cool, right? Again, either don't include it at all, as it might be a bit of an overkill, or leave it to about 100 max. So with that in mind, great job on completing the hero section. It has been the toughest part of this portfolio, trust me on that, but at least you learn a lot about lights. Now, there's one more thing regarding this hero that you might have not noticed we're missing right now, as opposed to how it is in the final application. It is the loading animation of this text. Even though this part is always animating, once we reload, we also want to animate each one of these lines line by line to look something like this. Check this out. The first one will drop from the top first, then the second, and then the third. Check this out. As I reload the page, they all drop one by one, from the bottom to the top. So let me show you how to implement that animation This time we won't be using Three.js, rather we'll be using GSAP. So head over into your hero component and let's import use GSAP coming from GSAP React, as well as import GSAP, which is the general library, from GSAP, just like this. Then inside of the component, we can call the use GSAP hook to animate this h1 tags. We can do it by saying use GSAP. To it, you have to pass a callback function that we want to activate. And there you can use the GSAP library to say go from and then go to. And to this, you can pass two different objects to define what's happening with these elements. First, you have to target which elements you want to animate. In this case, I'll animate the hero text class name. So make sure to start with a dot. And specifically, I want to animate all h1 elements within the hero text class name. Then we're going to provide a from position. So I want to animate it from these properties to the following properties. Let's say that I want the elements to start from a bit of a higher position on the y-axis. For example, y is 50 and opacity of 0. So we can bring them to life later on from 0 opacity to the full opacity. Then we want to animate them to y0. So we want to bring them down. We want to change the opacity to 1. We want to stagger each one of these h1 elements by 0.2 seconds. So we get first 1, 2, 3. And I want to set the duration of the animation to 1 second and the easing to power 2 dot in out. This is just how this specific animation will play out. So now if I save this and if I increase the duration to something like 5 seconds so you can see it better and reload, you should be able to see how all of these three are coming one after another. To make the effect even more pronounced, I can change the stagger to about 1.5 seconds. Reload and check this out. First, we have the first one, then we have the second one, and then we have the third one. Of course, you never want to keep your users waiting, so what you can do is bring the stagger to 0.2 and the duration to 1 second. That'll end up with a nice animation that looks like this. Of course, the text is even larger on full screen, so the animation looks even better there. Looking good, right? GSAP is not that hard. So let me explain what happens here. The Y position moves each headline from 50 to 0 to give it some movement, and then the opacity from 0 to 1 fades the element in. And then a stagger gives us that cascading animation. Pretty cool, right? Now, another thing that we need to do with our hero section is to make this button scroll a bit down. We cannot see the scroll just yet because we haven't implemented any additional sections, but once we do implement it, we want it to scroll very smoothly to a very precise position. This is what we want to achieve. I click it and we go right here to the top of these statistics, and then we can see the portfolio. So to implement that, head over into the hero section, and then from the hero, head over to the button that we created that is right here within the header. There we go. Now to this button, we have the anchor tag, which is the main clickable element. So let's give it an onClick function where we can access the click event. Within here, the first thing we want to do is prevent the default behavior of the browser, and that is to reload the screen once we click on an element. Then we want to get access to a target that we want to scroll to. And you can use the document.getElementById, and whatever ID you define, we can scroll to it. In this case, I'll call it counter, because right here, within these elements, we want to count up some of these statistics. So I'll call it counter. Then we only want to scroll if we found that element and if we have an ID. In this case, we're only passing the ID from the hero section, and we won't pass it later on once we use it in the contact section. So the contact should send the email and not scroll up. Only this one should scroll up. Next, we have to give it a bit of an offset, which means kind of figure out to leave some space at the top. So I'll say const offset is equal to window.innerHeight, and I found the number 0.15 to work pretty cool. I'll show you later on how it works with and without this. Finally, we want to calculate how far down we need to scroll. So I'll say top is equal to target.get bounding client rect dot top plus the window that scroll y minus the offset, because we want to leave some space on top of these elements to make them appear nicely on the screen. And finally, you can say window dot scroll to, define the top that you want to scroll to, and set the scroll behavior to smooth. So very soon as we implement those counters right here below, we'll be able to click and scroll down. So let's implement it. I'll head back over to my hero section, and below this figure and below the div that's wrapping it, still within the section, I'll render an animated counter. But let's first create that component within the components folder and call it animated counter.jsx, run RAFCE right within it, and then import it right here where we were. Animated counter, a self-closing component. And if you do that, you should be able to see it right here at the bottom. I'll collapse my browser, head into the animated counter, and we can implement it. We can start with the JSX. I'll first wrap everything in a div that has an ID of counter, because we're going to use this element to scroll to later on. Next, I want to give it a class name equal to padding-x-lg to give them some space on left and right. I also want to give it on extra large devices a margin top of 0, but typically a margin top of 32. Within this div, we can have yet another div that'll have a class name equal to margin x of auto, grid of 4 columns. So we're going to show 4 different cards. Within it, we can map over our counter items. So just start typing counter items and press enter. It will automatically import them from your constants. Here, I put different values. For example, years of experience, satisfied clients, completed projects, and client retention rate. You can of course change this. If you maybe have 10 years of experience or less, you most likely have much less, but that's totally okay. Satisfied clients, you can change all of these numbers or values, as well as the labels that you want to display right here. It's all dynamic. So let's map over those counter items by saying .map, where you get each item. And for each item, you want to automatically return a div that'll look a bit like this. It'll have a key equal to counter items dot label, and you want to give it a class name equal to counter dash number, text dash white, text dash 5XL, font dash bold, and margin bottom of 2. Next, you can give it a 0 number. So we're going to start all of them with a 0. And then you can render the item dot suffix. What is this suffix? Well, it is either a plus for a number or a percentage for the retention rate. And then if you save this, you should already be able to see 4 different numbers right here. But let's actually wrap this in another div. So I'll make it a div like this, and I'll put it right within it. We want to wrap it in a card first. So this outer div will have a class name of bg-zinc of 900, rounded-lg, padding of 10, flex, flex-call, and a justify center. So now we can see 4 of these different cards just showcasing empty values. But before the value, we can actually render another div that'll render the item.label. So we have 0 years of experience, 0 satisfied clients, and 0 completed projects. Not so good. Let's give this div a class name of text-white50 and text-lg. Okay, that's a bit better. But still, why are we saying 0 right here? Well, that's because we always want to start with a 0, but then we want to count the elements up to the value that we have chosen. Either 10, 100, or more. Sure, what you could do is immediately display it right here. So that's going to be just item.value. And that's pretty cool already, right? But I want to show you how you can animate this element to go up in number to reach those specific values. So let's do that next. To implement our counter, we can use a React CountUp npm package. You can simply install it by saying npm install react countup. And then we can use it by importing the countup right at the top, and then using it like a countup component. That'll look something like this. Within this div, we can implement a countup and give it a start and an end. If you don't provide a start, it'll start from 0. And then right here as the end, we can implement the item.value. And you can also add a prefix or a suffix to it. So the suffix can be item.suffix. Let's see how that looks like. I'll delete this, save it. And if I go back and reload, you can now see that all of these numbers count up. Even though this is 10 and this is 100, the component automatically takes enough time to load them all the same. Perfect. This is looking amazing. And let's check it out on desktop. Yep, this is looking good. We have our hero section, which takes full height of the screen. Very soon, we can also add a navbar right here. But for now, we have this hero. And then if you click on see my work, it actually scrolls down to these countup cards. So this is looking great. And on mobile, the reason why we had to put so much work into this see my work button is because sometimes you cannot scroll on mobile devices, as instead you'll be actually drag and dropping our 3D model. So it was super important for this see my work to properly scroll down to the countup section. So with that in mind, we have now implemented the hero section with this amazing 3D model and GSAP animations we have added to these H1s, as well as implemented a counter for some of the most important metrics about our years of experience, satisfied clients, projects, and more. In the next lesson, let's focus on developing this showcase section where you can display your highlighted project alongside 2 other projects you've done before. With the hero section done, let's focus on the section below, the showcase section, where we show 3 real-world apps you've built, 1 large featured app on the left, and 2 supporting projects on the right. First things first, we have to create a new section. So within the sections folder, create a new file and call it showcase section.jsx. Run rafce and import it right within the app below the hero. Showcase section right here. If you do that, you'll be able to see a showcase section text right below. So let's get started with the layout. First, I'll wrap everything with a div, and I'll give it an ID equal to work so that we can use the navigation bar links later on to scroll to that section. Then I'll give it a class name of app-showcase, and this will nicely center it on the screen. Right within it, I'll create another div, and this one will have a class name equal to w-full, so it takes the full width of the screen. And then within it, I'll have another div with a class name equal to showcase layout. This one will make it flex row on extra large devices, so we can fit 1 on the left and 2 on the right, and flex call, so all of them show one below another on mobile devices. So now we can split this into 2 sides. We're going to have the left side right here on the top, and then after that, we'll have the right side. So on the left side, let's create a new div. This div will have a class name equal to first project wrapper. And within it, I'll create another div with a class name of image-wrapper. And within it, I'll render a self-closing image with a source of /images/project1.png. And I'll give it an alt tag of ride. Because if you take a look at my images, right here within the public folder, images, and then we have our project 1, you'll see that this is ride, a React Native Uber-like application, which if you want to learn how to build, well, you can do it for free on YouTube. If you wanted to put the image or the thumbnail of your project, which you most likely want to do, unless you build this one, of course, then you'll have to upload your own image to the images folder and just refer to it right here. And then you'll be able to see it right at the bottom. Within this div containing the image, I'll create another div with a class name equal to text-content. And within it, I'll display an H2 that'll say on demand rides made simple with a powerful user-friendly app called Ride. Of course, you can enter the title of your application right here. Then we can have another description paragraph right below with a class name of text-white-50 and on medium devices text-XL. And here I'll copy what I have in the already deployed website, an app built with React Native, Expo, Tailwind CSS for fast, user-friendly experiences. Of course, I invite you to talk a bit more about the technologies you used here or what obstacles you encountered while developing it. And now we can head over below this div for the left side and focus on the right side. There we can have one div which will wrap those two additional projects with a class name of project list wrapper and overflow-hidden. Within it, we can have a div for our first project. So let's give it a class name of project. And within it, we can render a div within which we can render that project's image. So let's give it a source of images project2.png with an alt tag of library management platform. If you save it, you'll see one image right here, but we can position it a bit better by styling this div that's wrapping it with a class name of image-wrapper, bg of hash, FFE-FDB, just like this, so we nicely position it within the screen. Right below this div containing the image, we can also render an H2 where we can simply say library management platform. In this case, we don't need to give it a description because this is a secondary project. So let's go ahead and copy this entire project div. So for me, that's this red one right here. And I'll paste it one more time just below, this time for our second project. So I'll change the background color a bit so they're not the same to FFE7EB. There we go. So just a bit of a different color. Image will point to project 3 and the alt tag will say YC directory. This is yet another of our YouTube projects, YC directory, which is a startup showcase app. Of course, I invite you to put your own projects right here. And now is the time that we add some animations to this screen. It doesn't look that exciting on mobile, but on desktop, we do have a big project on the left and two smaller ones on the right. But if you compare it with the final project, you'll notice that there, they nicely appear one after another. Whereas on our current application, they just show up and that's it. So let's animate them one by one. To do that, you'll want to give each one of these project divs its own reference. So right at the top, let's create a new const section ref is equal to use ref coming from React. And at the start, set it to be equal to null. We need one for this section, and then we need one for each one of the projects. So I'll say const project1 ref is equal to use ref. At the start, set to null again. And then I'll duplicate it 2 more times for the project 2 and project 3. Now we can give a ref to the main section. So I'll actually rename this to an HTML5 semantic section tag with a ref of section ref. And then I'll also give it to each one of these projects. The first one being this first project wrapper. I'll give it a ref equal to project1 ref. And then I'll head over to this second project and I'll give it a ref of project2 ref. And finally, for the third one, I'll give it a ref of project3 ref. So now all of these different divs or projects have different references attached to them. So now we can apply some animations on them. Let me show you how to do that using GSAP. First things first, we will import GSAP within curly braces from GSAP. And one thing that you want to do is say gsap.register plugin, and you'll pass in a scroll trigger, which you'll need to import from GSAP. So say import in curly braces, scroll trigger coming from GSAP scroll trigger. And finally, we'll also need to import the use GSAP hook, which we used before, which is coming from @GSAP React. You need to register this plugin because otherwise GSAP won't know that you want to apply some scroll related features. You already know how to start applying GSAP animations. you do it using the use GSAP hook. So let's say use GSAP right here, and you have to give it a callback function with a dependency array right here at the bottom. It works similarly to React's use effect. This means that everything in this block of code runs only once when the component mounts. So there's one thing that I want to do first, and that is fade in the entire section that shows these different projects. I can do that by using the section ref .current, and I want to animate it from and to something. So I'll actually have to say GSAP .from to, and then the first parameter you pass to it is the reference to a div that you want to animate. Then you pass from which animations you want to go. So I want to go from opacity of 0. And then you, for the third parameter, pass where you want to go. You want to go to opacity of 1 throughout the duration of 1.5 seconds. And I'll actually put this into multiple lines so it's easier to see what's happening. So GSAP from to, applied to this div, opacity from 0 to 1 throughout the duration of 1.5 seconds. If you do that and reload, you'll notice that now it fades in pretty nicely. And now we want to animate each project on scroll one by one. We can do that by gathering them into an array and then loop through each one and create a scroll animation. So right at the top, I'll say const projects and create an array of those projects. Then to it, I want to add a project1 ref .current, project2 ref .current, and finally project3 ref .current. So we have stored all of these references in an array. Then we want to say cards.forEach. So for each card, and take its card index, open up a new function block, and then run the GSAP from to function. What do you want to animate? Well, I want to animate a card. Which card? Well, the one that we're going over for that specific round of the for each loop. And what do I want to do to it? I want to start it at Y50 and opacity of 0, which means that it starts as invisible. And then what I want to do to it is I want to change the Y to 0, which means that we're going to move it back to its normal position and make it fully visible by changing the opacity to 1 throughout a duration of 1 second. And I also want to add a delay to stagger when they load. So I'll say 0.3 seconds and then take the index plus 1. That's because the indices start at 0. So instead of having 0 at the 1, we'll have 1 times 0.3. So the delay for the first one will be 0.3. Then for the next one, it'll increase to 0.6, and then it'll increase one more time to 0.9. And finally, to know when we want to apply this scroll animation, we have to have a scroll trigger. Here, you can say when you reach which portion of the screen, when they want to trigger it, and we can say the trigger is actually the card. So animate when the card enters the viewport. And then you can decide when exactly you want to start it. For example, start when the top of the card is near the bottom of the screen. So about 100 pixels from the bottom. And right here, I should have said projects. So we're mapping over each one of these project cards. Okay, so now if you reload and scroll down, well, you won't be able to see the animation just yet. You'll just be able to see this one where it goes from opacity 0 to opacity 1. So why cannot we see this animation? Is it something with the for each loop? Well, not really. It's just that you have to use GSAP from within the use GSAP hook. So simply select this and bring it down into the use GSAP hook right here. There we go. And you can also bring these projects here. So now we're saying use GSAP, and then we're applying the GSAP animation. So if I now save this, scroll up to the top, reload, and then scroll down, you can now see how each one of these nicely appears as you scroll. And of course, let's not forget that this looks even better on desktop devices. So as you scroll, we get all of them appear nicely one by one. Great. And that brings us to the end of the showcase section. Now we could focus on the next section, but now that we have the hero and one more section, what we can focus on instead is implementing the navigation bar, because now we have two different things that we can scroll from and to. So let's do that next. Let's get started with developing our navbar. It should look something like this on desktop, where if you scroll down, you can always get back to the top of it by clicking your name. And then here, it allows you to smoothly scroll to different parts of your portfolio. And then on top, we have contact, which brings us all the way to the bottom to this great 3D model that we'll implement soon. And then if you check it out on mobile, it'll be very simple. We don't need the viewer to necessarily see every single thing. If they want it, they're going to scroll. But then at the moment where they want to contact you, they can just go here and do that immediately. So let's focus on implementing the navbar. We can start by creating a new component right within source and components, and create it right here by creating a new navbar.jsx file, run rafce, and just import it over in your app.jsx above the hero section. So that'll be the navbar like this. If you do that and go back to your website, you should be able to see it right here on the top, and then we can implement it. Just head over into it, turn it into an HTML5 semantic header tag, and give it a class name equal to navbar, and within it, create a div that'll have a class name of inner, and within it, render an anchor tag that'll have a class name of logo and an href of hash hero, pointing to your hero section when clicked. And there you can type your name. I'll type Adrian JSM. Of course, you can put your first and last name right there. There we go. Pretty cool, right? Now, right below this anchor tag, we can render nav for the rest of the navigation items. And here, I'll give it a class name of desktop, so we know that whatever is within this nav only appears on desktop. But then after the nav, I'll render another anchor tag that'll have an href pointing to hash contact with a class name of contact-btn and group. And within it, we can render a div with a class name of inner. And within it, we can render a span that'll simply say contact me. There we go. So now we have a contact as well as Adrian JSM right here at the top. Now the question is, what do we show within the nav? Well, for that, we'll have to head over to the desktop version of the application. So I'll expand it a bit. And within it, let's render a UL, an unordered list. Within the unordered list, we want to map over all of our link items. Sure, you could create an array of objects where you have a title for each one, and then you also have a URL that you want to point to. But it's always better to declare those links in your constants in case they change. You don't have to change them here. So simply say nav links and import it over from constants index.js. If you want to change those links, you can, but these are the sections that our portfolio will have: work, experience, skills, and testimonials. Sections that every single portfolio needs to have. So once you're in there, just map over them, destructure the link and the name that we get from each one of these links, and then for each one, automatically return a list item, an li. And since we're mapping over it, we also have to provide it a key, which can be a name since it's unique, with a class name of group. And within each one, we can render an anchor tag that'll point to the link. So this is a dynamic link property, different for each one of these links. Within it, we can render a span element that'll render a name. And within it, we can also render another self-closing span that will have a class name of underline, allowing us to have that very cool visual effect. So if you save it, you should be able to see work, experience, skills, and testimonials with this cool underline. And if you click on work, since that is the first section we have implemented, you can immediately see it right here alongside its nice animation. Let's try it one more time. I can head up and I can see my work both here, and it nicely animates. Pretty cool, right? Now, check this out. If we scroll down, you'll notice that our navbar will kind of be hidden by some of the other more colorful elements that we have on the screen. That means that we want to actually give it some kind of a background so that it's visible even on top of these elements. For that, we have to keep track of the state of the navbar. If we're here, just leave it like this. It has enough contrast with the background. But as soon as we scroll down, we'll then apply some kind of a background. To do that, we have to figure out when have we scrolled and when have we not. So right here at the top of the navbar, I'll say const, and I'll define a new use state called scrolled and set scrolled. At the start, it'll be equal to the use state. That'll simply say false. And this use state, of course, is coming from React. Then I'll open up a new use effect coming from React that'll happen only at the start or when the component gets mounted. So I need to define the dependency array as an empty array. And within there, we want to figure out how do we handle the scroll. So I'll create a handle scroll function, which will check whether the user has scrolled at least 10 pixels. So say const is scrolled is equal to window.scrollY is greater than 10. If that is the case, I'll set scrolled to true because it means that the user has scrolled. And now I want to add this event listener to the window. It'll be a scroll event listener and it'll call the handle scroll function. And I also want to unmount it to clean it up. So I'll say return callback function window.remove event listener scroll and handle scroll. So this way we're still keeping all of the optimization in React by removing or cleaning up the event listener when the component is unmounted. So now that we have access to this scroll state, let's put it to use. See this navbar? We want to apply different classes to it depending on whether the user has scrolled or not. So I'll make this class name dynamic and a dynamic template string for that matter. It'll always have the class name of navbar, but if scrolled is true, in that case, I'll also give it a class name of scrolled, else I'll give it a class name of not scrolled. So if you check out both of these, you can see that scrolled simply applies a top 0 and a background black, and then not scrolled applies a background transparent. That's it. That's the only difference. So now if you scroll down right here, you'll notice that now it has a dark background, so it's still fully visible even when appearing over all of these elements. And then if I go up, it simply disappears. Makes sense, right? And with that in mind, your navbar is now fully completed. It scrolls to work and to home, but later on, it'll also scroll to all of these additional sections, which we're just about to implement. So let's start with the next one on the list. And that one is the logo showcase that scrolls through the logos of different companies that you have worked with in the past. So let's do that next. Let's start implementing the logo carousel. This is all about social proof. You want to show off client logos in a smooth, continuous scrolling. This is called a marquee, I think, just like the top tier agency sites do. So let's create a new component just for it. I'll head over into the components folder and create a new file called LogoSection.jsx. Within it, you know the drill, run rafce and then import it right here, logo section, as a self-closing component right below the showcase section. Once you do that, you should be able to see an empty piece of text. So let's head over into it. And instead of this empty div, create a div that has a class name of on medium devices, margin Y of 20. So that's 20 on top and bottom, but typically margin Y of 10. So only on medium devices do we want to have that larger margin Y. And then also give it a position of relative. Right within it, create two separate self-closing divs, both of which will have a class name equal to gradient edge, and then duplicate it. You'll see very soon what that does, but essentially you can see how these logos disappear on the left and then they start appearing from the right as it moves. So right below, create a new div that'll have a class name equal to marquee, and give it a height of about 52. Then, right within it, create another div that'll have a class name of marquee box with a medium divisors of gap 12 in between the elements, and typically a gap of 5 should do the trick. This marquee is the visible area that you see on the screen, but the marquee box will actually have twice the width and it'll animate indefinitely to the left. This is how you can apply animations. So let's research them a bit deeper. You can see that this marquee takes 100 dynamic viewport width and we hide it. Okay, so this is what you can see on the screen. But this marquee box will actually have 200% width and then an overflow hidden. So we're animating it outside of the screen. And we're applying a simple CSS animation of marquee 60 seconds linear infinite. Believe it or not, that's all it takes. You can do a lot of stuff built right into CSS. So the only thing remaining for us to do is to add the logos. We're gonna loop through all of the logos twice, so it feels infinite. First, we need to import the list of the logos. So I'll say logo icons list coming from constants. And as you can see, I put about 11 logos right here, but feel free to remove them or feel free to add the logos of the companies that you worked for or that you collaborated with. And if you didn't work with any major companies that have known or good looking logos, well, then you might just skip this section altogether. If you want to, the only thing you have to do is comment it out from here and then move over to the next section. With that said, I will map over it, get an icon for each one, and then simply display a new component for each one of these. A component called logo icon. So let me define it right here, since this is the only place where it'll be used. Logo icon. It is a self-closing component that simply accepts an icon and it returns a div with a class name of flex-none, flex-center, and a marquee item. And it'll render an image of a source icon.img path, as well as an alt tag of icon.name. So now we can loop over or map over those logo icons like this. We can give it a key equal to icon.name, and then we can pass over the entire icon equal to icon to it. So now if you save this, you'll be able to see the logos, but what we have to do is actually duplicate it one more time. And we're doing this because this trick creates a duplicate stream of logos. So when the first one sets to scroll out, the second one continues seamlessly. Hopefully it makes sense. But yeah, believe it or not, that is it. The magic here lies in this animation CSS property where you apply a specific type of the animation, choose the duration, choose whether it's linear or not, and then make it infinite. And then that'll scroll the images from left to right. Pretty cool, right? Once again, I'm totally aware that you might not have hundreds of companies you worked for in the past. So if that is the case, you can totally just comment this section out and focus on the next one to come. Because the next ones are cards that feature your strengths. To start implementing the featured cards, let's go ahead and create a new section within the sections folder. I'll call it FeatureCards.jsx, run RAFCE, and simply import it within the app. Feature cards. Now that I look at it, the logo section is also technically a section and not a component. So let me move it right here into the sections, but make sure to fix up these imports so that it's coming from sections instead of from components. Great. With that said, move over into the feature cards and let's start implementing them. The goal of these cards is to highlight your top strengths as a developer, things like the quality, communication, and timely delivery of your projects. Each card is a compact summary of one of your core abilities using an icon, a title, and a description. So first, let's create a layout by creating a div that'll have a class name of wfull, padding x of lg, and within it, create another div that'll have a class name of margin x auto, and let's split it into a grid that has 3 columns. Now, you want to map over your abilities coming from constants index.jsx. These are some of the abilities that ChatGPT thinks are important, but I want you to go ahead and change all of this text right here because you are a special individual and you have your own strengths. So change the titles, descriptions, and if needed, image paths as well to showcase what you are capable of. Then we want to map over all of these different strengths. And for each one, we can destructure the image path, the title, and the description. And then we can just map over them and automatically return them. For each one, I'll return a div. And for now, I'll make that div simply render the h3 that'll say title. If you do that and go back to your current application, you'll see quality focus, reliable communication, and on-time delivery. Let's style it a bit different to make it a card. First, I'll give it a key since this is an element we're mapping over. I'll make it a title since the title is unique. And I'll give it a class name of card-border. I'll also give it a rounded -XL, which will make the corners rounded, a padding of 8 to give it some space, also flex -col, and a gap of 4 in between the elements within the cards. Next, I'll create an inner div right here that'll have a class name equal to size of 14, flex, items-center, justify-center, and rounded-full. This is for the icon we're going to display. So let me render a self-closing image tag with a source of img path and an alt tag of title. If you save this, you should be able to see this icon appear, which already brings so much more life into it. And below it, we have this h3, to which we can give a class name of text-white, text-2XL, font-semi-bold, and margin top of 2. There we go, looking good. And below it, we can render a p tag with a class name of text-white-50 and text-LG, and it can render the description. There we go. This is already looking so much better. One thing that I noticed is that right here, I misspelled padding. So this was supposed to say padding XLG, and that'll provide some padding on left and right. And to give it some more vertical space to breathe, we need to rename this to grid 3 cols, as in columns, plural, because this will apply this grid column layout, which will nicely space them out on all different types of devices. There we go. This is looking better. Looks great on mobile and nicely complements this logo section. And if you check it out on desktop, it looks great too. Perfect. Oh yeah, I don't think I've seen the logo section on desktop. It looks even better because now you should get the idea of why we're using double the icons. So once some scroll to the left side of the screen, new ones appear on the right side. Perfect. This section is done as well. So now we can showcase not only the companies you worked for, but also your top features. But what matters even more than features is your experience. So let's develop one of the most exciting sections of this portfolio next, your work experience timeline. It has a couple of interesting elements, such as this card right here that has this cool hover effect, or this timeline that expands as you scroll down and changes colors depending on the logo of the company that you worked for. Pretty cool stuff, right? So let's do that next. Professional work experience. Or maybe it's not work experience for you, but rather you're showcasing the timeline of how you build different projects. Either way, this section will tell your career journey in a visually structured timeline, blending the clean layout with these animated transitions. On the left side, you'll have testimonial style experience cards. In the middle, we'll have a timeline. And on the right side, you'll have all of your job responsibilities. So let's start with creating this section. I'll head over to the sections folder and create a new experience section.jsx. I'll run rafce and I'll simply import it over below the feature cards. There we go. Makes sense, right? It appears at the bottom. So let me head over into it and turn it into a section. This section will have an ID of experience, so we can nicely scroll to it from the navbar. And it'll also have a class name of wfull, so it takes the full width of the screen, as well as on medium devices, a margin top of 40 to divide it from the top, and typically a margin top of 20. It'll have section padding, so we give it some space to breathe, as well as on extra large devices, padding X will be 0 because we have enough space to show it all around. Within this section, we'll have another div that'll have a class name equal to w-full, h-full, on medium devices, padding X of 20, and typically a padding X of 5. Now within it, we want to display our header title. This is the title I'm talking about, my career overview, and then professional experience. We'll want to turn this into a new custom component as we will reuse it in multiple places later on. So let's do it by creating a new reusable component called title header.jsx, run rafce, and import it over within the experience section, title header, just so we can very easily and immediately see it at the bottom. Then pass over a title equal to professional work experience, and also pass a sub, which is a subtitle that can say something like my career overview. And maybe at the start of that sub, we can also display some kind of an emoji, maybe like a work briefcase or something like that. So now we can head over into that title header and we can accept those props and display them on the screen. So simply destructure the title and the subtitle right at the top and return a div with a class name of flex, flex-call, items-center, and a gap of 5. And within it, render another div with a class name equal to hero-badge, and within it, render a p tag, which will render the subtitle. And therefore, you'll be able to see this My Career Overview. If you open it up within CSS, you'll see that we're applying a black background border, some padding Y on top and bottom, and X for left and right. We are making it rounded, making it fit the screen, making the text a bit small, and making it not wrap so it stays in the single line. And then right below this div, I'll create another div with a class name of font semi-bold. On medium devices, text 5XL, typically text 3XL, as well as text center. And here we can display that big title headline, such as this one, Professional Work Experience. So now that we have the title for our experience section, let's loop over our experience cards. We can do it right here below the title by creating another div with a class name of margin top of 32 to divide it a bit from the top, and a class name of relative. Within it, I want to create a div that will act as a wrapper for our experience cards. So let's also give it a class name of relative, a z index of 50, and on extra large devices, space y of 32, and space y of 10 on all other devices. Within it, we want to map over our EXP cards or experience cards coming from constants index.js. You can see here that I created 3 different cards. Each one is an object that has a review, which is just like some kind of a description of what I did for that company, an image path, a logo path, a title, date, and responsibilities. I think this gives you a pretty good idea of how you should fill in this data yourself for your previous positions. Once you do that, you'll need to map over it. So let's say .map, and for each one of these cards, we want to automatically return a div. Since we're mapping over it, this div will have a key equal to card.title, since it's unique, and a class name of exp card wrapper. And within it for now, just display a card.title so we can see something. There we go. I worked as a React Native, full stack, and front-end developer. And now we want to make it look a bit nicer. So let's first focus on this experience card right here that allows you to hover over these elements, and then you get this nice looking border. Now, you can also see that we'll reuse this same card later on in customer feedback highlights or testimonials from specific people. So of course, that tells you that this will be a reusable component. So let's create it. I'll head over to the components folder and create a new card. I'll call it glowcard.jsx because we have the glowing border. I'll run RAFCE, and within the experience section, right here, instead of rendering the title, we can render a div that'll have a class name equal to, on extra large devices, W2/6. So this will give it a specific width on larger devices. And then within it, we want to render a glow card. This will be a component that is not a self-closing component, meaning something goes into it. And what is that? Well, that can be a div with a self-closing image tag that'll have a source equal to card.img path with an alt tag of card.title. And then alongside passing that as the children into the glow card, we can also pass the card as a prop, which will contain all of the other card properties. So let's head over into the card and let's accept all of these properties that we're passing into it. First, we get the card itself, but of course we need to destructure it. And then we get the children, which refers to everything that we passed over as a child of that component. So here we can return a div that'll have a class name equal to card-border, timeline-card, rounded-XL, and a padding of 10. Within it, I'll display a self-closing div with a class name of glow. And now you can slowly start seeing how this card will glow as you hover over it. So let's try to look a bit deeper into how this glow works. Well, first of all, we remove the pointer events so you don't get the cursor pointer, so it doesn't seem the cards are clickable because they are not. We position it absolutely over that element with full width and height in the middle of the screen. And then we're focusing only on changing the border of that card as we move to it. The code for the exact border is right here, and I am applying a bit of a more complex gradient right here. I found this CSS somewhere on the internet. It could have been a really nice code pen, and I saved it somewhere, and then I ended up using it on this project. Whenever you find some nice CSS, always save it. You never know when it's going to come in handy. So now that we have this glow right here, we actually want to display something within this card. First, we want to display the number of stars or the rating that this person has given you. So let's do that within this div, where I will open up a dynamic block of code and say array.from length is 5. And then we want to get access to the index. So we're mapping over these 5 elements. We don't care about the first one. We only care about the index. So you do it like this. And for each one, you want to automatically return an image that'll be equal to a source, images, star.png. It has to have a key of index, and it has to have an alt tag of star, and a class name equal to size of 5. If you do this, you should be able to see 5 stars for each one of these cards. We can also style the div a bit further by giving it a class name of flex, items-center, gap of 1 in between the stars, and a margin bottom of 5. So now we have 5 stars within each one of these cards. We can go below this div that's wrapping those stars and create another div with a class name of margin bottom of 5. And within it, we can render a piece of text that'll render the review of the card. We can give it a class name equal to text-white 50 and text-lg. So we make it a bit larger. And more importantly, right below this div, we can render the children. In this case, the children being the logo that we're passing over right here from the experience section. But now, if you hover over it, just one side or one border actually lights up, and you can see this gradient that is being applied to the top and bottom side of this border. But now, how do we actually make it follow our cursor? Well, for that, we'll have to do some math, or rather we'll have to know about the position of our cursor. So let me show you how to do that. First, I'll create a new reference to an element, and I'll call it card refs, and I'll make it equal to use ref, and at the start, it'll be equal to an empty array of references. Then I'll create a function called handle mouse move. It'll be a higher order function, which means that first we want to figure out over which card are we moving over, and then we want to get access to the event of the actual mouse, so that move event. And then once we have that, we can figure out which card we're on. So we'll say const card is equal to card refs dot current and get the index of the current card we're on. And if a card doesn't exist, simply exit out of this function. Now, of course, for this to work, we have to give this div a reference, and this reference will actually take in the element, and it'll say card refs dot current index is equal to the element. So depending on which one we're currently on, we will only move for that specific card. And I'll also call the on mouse move, and I'll call the handle mouse move function and pass in the specific index that we are moving over. Make sure that we also have an index here. So we have to pass an index as a prop to this function. So I'll say index. And from the experience section, I'll also pass over the index next to the card. This index you have to get over right here as the second parameter of the map function. Great. So now that we have that, as you scroll down, you'll be able to see that no animation is happening. We're not yet tracking anything. Right now, we just know on which card we're on. So now the magic happens. First, we have to get the mouse position relative to the card. So first, let's get access to the position of the card itself by saying rect is equal to card.get bounding client rect, like this. Then we have to get the X position of the mouse by saying e.client X minus rect.left minus rect.width divided by 2. I told you we'll have to do some math. And we want to do the same for mouse Y position, which is e.client Y minus rect.top minus rect.height over 2. Not only do we have to calculate the position of the mouse, but we also have to calculate the angle. So I'll say calc the angle from the center of the card. So I'll say let angle is equal to math.atan2. This atan2 is a static method that returns the angle in the plane in radians between the positive x-axis and the ray from 0, 0. Yep, I told you this requires some complex math, but I really wanted to show you how to do this cool effect on these cards. So to this, you pass the mouse Y and then the mouse X positions. Then you multiply it over with 180 degrees divided by math.pi. Then we need to adjust the angle so it's in between 0 and 360. So I'll say angle is equal to, in parentheses, angle plus 360, modulo operator, so this will give us the remainder of the division, 360. And trust me, I asked ChatGPT to help a bit with this. So no worries if it's not fully understandable on the first try. You can even copy this block of code and ask ChatGPT to explain it even further, if my explanations are not enough. And then finally, we want to set the angle as a CSS variable by saying card.style.setProperty -- start and set it to angle plus 60. So this way we have nice movement over our cards. And before we test it out, looks like I made a mistake here. I should have said if no card, then return. But if we do have a card, well, then let's do all of this math and let's make it work. So now check this out. You can actually hover over this, and depending on the angle that your mouse is pointing from the center of the card, it'll actually change. So if you very erratically move it around the center, you can see how it moves. But as you go to the outside, the angle becomes smoother, and then you can move very smoothly to different sides. Again, this is a very cool effect. And do you need to know this as a full stack developer? Not necessarily. Nowadays, you can find a lot of these cool effects online. But if you want to become an amazing CSS or front-end developer that delivers these kinds of exceptional, crazy experiences, and if this interests you, then definitely go for it. Try to understand on a deeper level how this gives us the angle, how we're applying that angle over to a CSS property, and then finally, how, once that property gets applied, it actually calculates the gradient that we're applying to the border of this card. But with that said, this is looking great. And we could have totally stopped here with the professional work experience, but I want to dive much deeper. I want to implement the full history of your work, not just the testimonial. So let's do that next. But first, it looks like I'm not passing the proper border right here. So it's card and card border. There we go. So now it makes it look like a card, and this makes the effect even better. And of course, don't forget that we're only halfway, or maybe 1/3 done with the professional work experience section. That's because this is only the left side. On mobile, it seems like we've done everything, but on desktop, well, we still have to add the timeline, and then to the right side, we have to add the full explanation of the experience. So let's do that next. Back in the experience section, right below our glow card. So still within the same div, right below the glow card and below one more div, we can create another div. This div will have a class name is equal to, on extra large devices, W is 4/6. So we have essentially split the screen into the first part, which takes 2/6 of the screen, and the second one takes 4/6. Basically, that's 1/3 and 2/3. So within this div, we can create another div with a class name equal to flex and items-start. And within it, we can do another div that'll have a class name equal to timeline-wrapper, within which we can render a self-closing div that'll have a class name of timeline. And then below that, we can create another div, self-closing, that'll have a class name of gradient-line W1 and H-full. If you save this, you won't see anything yet. And that's because we have to animate this timeline with GSAP. So for now, let's instead focus on the second part of our screen, which are going to be the experience cards. So I'll head only one div below where we have this timeline wrapper, and I'll render another div that'll have a class name equal to exp text flex, on extra large devices a larger gap of 20, on medium devices a gap of 10, and usually a gap of 5 with a position relative and z index of 20. Within it, we can then display another div that'll be a wrapper for the image. So I'll give it a class name of timeline-logo. And within it, I'll render an image, which will have a source of card.logoPath with an alt tag of logo. So now we can only see Docker right here, and the other two are not yet there because we need to fix up this GSAP animation of the timeline. Next, we can go one div below and create a div for the final card for our experience section. It'll have an H1 right in between it, and this H1 will render the card.title. There we go, full stack developer. We can make it a bit larger by giving it a class name of font-semi-bold and text-3XL. So now if I collapse this just a tiny bit, you should be able to see it right here. There we go. Below it, I'll display a p tag that'll have a class name equal to margin Y of 5 and text weight of 50. And there we can render the card.date. There we go. So now it says when you work there, but we can also add some kind of an emoji right here and maybe make it a calendar so we can show the date. But let's not use the current date. Let's use the generic calendar. There we go. Now we can do one more p tag below this one that'll have a class name of text dash hash 839 CB5. So this is a color that I like for this one. And let's make it italic. And it'll simply say responsibilities. There we go. And now let's actually say what we did there. So below the p tag, I'll render a UL with a class name of list-disk, ms of 5, margin top of 5, flex-col, a gap of 5, and text-white of 50. Within there, we can map over card.responsibilities.map, where we get each individual responsibility, and we can now show it as a list item. So this list item will have a key equal to responsibility, a class name equal to text-lg, and finally, it'll just render the responsibility. For example, developed and maintained user-facing features for the hosting your website, collaborated with UI/UX designers, and optimized web applications for maximum speed. These are all AI generated, don't look that good, but here's my quick tip for how you can write these in a better way. This is basically what you have accomplished. First, use strong action verbs. Developed, optimized, implemented, right? Collaborated, achieved, for example, for specific performance, right? So start with a strong action verb. Led, worked, contributed, you get the idea. But then bring in some tangible metrics or achievable results. So instead of just being generic with collaborated closely or developed user-facing features, tell me how much performance have you improved. For example, improved app performance, and then try to be specific, even down to a percentage or a number. Improved front-facing app performance by 17%, or maybe improved the load speeds by 2 seconds. Whatever you do, try to be specific in what you did, as that improves the credibility. And now that we have the left side and the right side, it's time to animate the timeline, which is going to give it that final touch. So let's focus on implementing that using GSAP. We'll start at the top of the screen. So let's start implementing this GSAP scroll animation. We already have done a GSAP scroll animation when we were building these cards right here. So you know that if you want to use a scroll animation, you have to import a scroll trigger from GSAP. So right here, I'll say import the original GSAP library coming from GSAP. I'll also want to import the use GSAP hook coming from GSAP React. And finally, we want to get access to the scroll trigger, which will allow the scroll animations coming from GSAP scroll trigger. And then you want to register it by saying gsap.register plugin scroll trigger. There we go. And now we are ready to use this use GSAP hook right here. So let's say use GSAP. It takes in a callback function and an empty dependency array as a typical React use effect. Great. So what kind of animations do we want to implement here? Well, first, we want to reveal the left side cards by sliding them in from the left and fading them in. See these cards? We want to slide and fade them in. If I show you the finished application and I reload, check this out. As I scroll down, you'll notice that these cards slide in. There was the first one, second one, and third one. So let's implement that. I'll say gsap.from. We want to animate a card. So where is this card coming from? Well, even though we don't have a card on its own here, we can use a GSAP utility. Check this out. I'll say gsap.utils.toArray, And we can take a class name called a timeline card, and we can turn it into an array of cards. And then we can map over each one of these cards and get access to that card element. Then, once we actually have access to the card, we can say, get this card from these specific animations or this specific state. First, we want to move the card in from the left side. So I'll say X% is equal to -100. The opacity will also start from 0, and we want to set the origin of the animation to the left side. So I'll say transform origin will be left and left. I also want to add a duration of 1 second and ease, which is a curve of how we're going to animate it, or the speed of the animation. So I'll use the power2.inout. It starts slowly and then it speeds up. And finally, we want to trigger the animation on scroll. So I'll say scroll trigger. Oh, but first this ease has to be a string like this. And I can trigger it on the card. But when are we going to start? Well, we're going to start the animation when the card is 80% down the screen. So I'll say start top 80%. If you now save this and reload, you'll see how nicely it appears once you reach the bottom part of the screen, and then also another one and another one. You don't want to show it too soon because the person is still viewing the top part. But as you're scrolling down, you want to show it just as it hits the screen, so you see something happening. There we go. Now we want to animate the timeline. As the user scrolls, we want to move from top and then go down. So in this case, I'll use another GSAP functionality. I'll say GSAP.to.timeline. So that is the class name we're switching. And then we want to set the transform origin to bottom, which means that it can also start from the bottom. So see, as I scroll up, it goes away. And if I scroll down, it appears. I'll choose an ease, in this case, a power1.inout, and add a scroll trigger where we want to trigger it on the dot timeline when the start is at top center, and we want to end it when we reach 70% down the screen. I'm going to be honest, I didn't come up with these values immediately. Coming up with the specific values takes time and testing. So I might maybe set it to 50 and play around a bit and see how it behaves, and then update it later on. Also, we want to update the animation as the user scrolls. So I'll say on update, and this still goes within the scroll trigger. We'll call a function that takes a look at the self current animation or current progress, and it scales the timeline height as the user scrolls. So from 1 to 0 as the user scrolls up the screen. So I'll say gsap.to.timeline, and I'll set the scale y to 1 minus self.progress. Now, if you reload, you will start seeing the timeline as we hit the center of the screen, and then it'll scroll down and follow us as we go. Check this out. And then as you reach the end, we cannot go any further right now because we don't have additional sections. Later on we will. But if you start scrolling back up, you can see that it starts disappearing. This is a super cool effect, isn't it? And the last part, we could also animate the text on the right. We can make it look something like this. Considering that the text on the left scrolls from the left, we don't have to move this from left to right because then a lot of things would be moving. We can just fade this one in. So see, as we reach this point, it'll slowly fade in alongside this icon. One more time, check it out. It faded in. So let's add that fade in animation. To get started with it, I'll actually copy this entire GSAP utils to array, and then I'll paste it at the bottom just before the use GSAP hook stops. In this case, we're not working with the timeline card, but rather the experience, so exp text. And for each piece of text, we want to run the GSAP from. We want to move it from 0 opacity, 0% because it's not moving. Throughout the duration of 1 second, we're not moving the origin, so we can leave it as it is. Ease can be as it is. Scroll trigger will be text, and start can be top 60. So we show it a bit later than we actually show the left side card. Now, if I reload and I scroll down, notice how it nicely appears alongside this icon. Perfect. Oh, but I was looking at the finished website, so let's go to the current one, reload, and same behavior. It's only that we cannot see the bottom one yet because we can't scroll any further yet. But as soon as we add the next section on our list, we'll be able to see it. And how does it look like on mobile? Well, check this out. We still get this timeline where it nicely appears, and then it starts scrolling. We see the hostinger, we see the testimonial, we continue scrolling down, and it looks wonderful. Here, we can even see the Docker one because it has more height. Perfect. Alongside the hero section, I think this is the second most interesting section in this portfolio and the second toughest to build. So great job on coming this far into this portfolio. The next section is also super cool. And here we'll develop these cards that have 3D tech icons that allows you to move them in space and time. Pretty cool, right? So let's focus on the tech stack that you know and you use to build your websites with next. I'll collapse it so we can nicely get started on it, close all of the currently open files besides the app, and let's focus on the tech stack. Let's talk about the tech stack. In this case, we're talking about what you can bring to the table, and we'll show it by using these animated 3D logos for each tool that you're proficient in. And of course, if we cannot find a 3D icon, I'll provide you with the alternative so you can just put an image right here and it'll still look great. So let's create it by creating a new section within the sections folder, and let's call it TechStack.jsx. Run rafce and import it straight within the app below the experience section. Perfect. That's looking great. So if we head back over here, we can see the tech stack and we can start by creating the layout. We'll wrap everything with a div that has an ID of skills so we can easily scroll to it. Then we can give it a class name of flex-center and section-padding. And right within it, we'll render another div within which we will reuse our title header component for the consistency of different sections. This title header requires two different params or props. The first one is title, so I'll say my preferred tech stack. And then below, we'll pass a sub. I'll enter some kind of an emoji right here, maybe like a deal hands emoji, and say what I bring to the table. Or we can say the skills I bring to the table. And there we go. We can immediately see it right here. So now we can render the skills grid with these 3D models. We can do that right below the title header. But first, let's give this div a class name of wfull, h-full, on medium devices, a padding x of 10, and typically a padding x of 5. And now, right below the title header, we can create another div with a class name equal to tech-grid. Within this div, we'll want to loop through the tech stack icons array and create a component for each item. So let's open up a dynamic block of code and say tech stack icons dot map, where we get each individual icon. And for each one, we want to automatically return a div that'll have a key equal to icon.name. And within it, we can also for now just display that icon name. So if you save it, you should be able to see React, Python, backend, interactive, and project management. Perfect. Now to make it look a bit better, we can style this div, which will basically be a card. So we can give it a card border. We can give it a tech card class name as well. Overflow of hidden, group, and on extra large devices, we can make it a rounded full and typically rounded LG. Now, what matters the most is what we show within it. Instead of rendering the icon name I'll first render a self-closing div that'll have a class name equal to TechCard animated BG. What this will do is once you hover over it, it'll actually animate it a bit, which is not mandatory, but I think it has a cool effect. After that, we can render another div that'll contain the content. So let's give it a class name of TechCard content. And within it, we can create a wrapper that contains the TechCard experience, which will render the 3D model of that specific TechStack icon. So let me create a div with a class name equal to Tech Icon Wrapper. And directly within it, we can render a new self-closing component. So let's create it under the components folder, and we can create a new folder and call it models, as in 3D models. And then within it, we can create another folder, which we can call Tech Logos. And within it, we can create a new Tech Icon.jsx and run RAFCE. Perfect. So now we have this Tech Icon, and we can import it right within the TechStack, where we have the Tech Icon wrapper. I'll call it Tech Icon, like this, and pass in the model right into it by getting it directly from the icon. So we're mapping over these TechStack icons, and each one of these icons has a name, a path to the model that is within our public models folder, a scale, and a rotation in case you want to change it by default. And then we're passing it over here. So now if you compare it, you'll see that we have different tech icons, and they're not yet in 3D, but they soon will be. Right below this div that's a wrapper for the tech icon, we can have another div that'll have a class name of padding X and W full. And we use these classes to add horizontal padding to the text and to make it take up the full width of the component. So within it, we can display the name of that icon. So I'll say icon.name. Perfect. So now we have React developer right here, and then we have the icon which we want to display in the middle. And let's just make sure to wrap it in a p tag. So if we close it like this, you can see that it'll nicely get centered. Now we can head over into the tech icon and start implementing that rotating 3D model for each one of the tech logos inside of a canvas. Remember, whenever you have a 3D experience, you can show it within a canvas. So before we get started, let me explain how it works. In simple terms, this is exactly what we want to do. First, we want to load a GLB model in a GLTF format. Then we want to add basic lighting to it so we can see it. We want to apply environment reflections for realism, wrap the model in a floating animation, and then optionally tweak the material, like setting the color on a mesh. And then we want to disable zoom because there's nothing to zoom into here. We just want to be able to move it around. So let's do just that. We'll start by loading in the models. Right here, I'll say const scene is equal to use GLTF coming from React.js, and I'll just get in the model from the props that we're passing into the function. So I'll say model. Keep in mind, we're passing it right here. Model is the icon. And then I'll simply load in model.model path. Perfect. We just loaded the GLB model using Dre's useGLTF hook. And the file path comes from the model path, which is right here within our constants file. So if you want to compare it, check out the public folder and then head over to models, and then you'll be able to see Python, Three.js, React, Node, and Git. Perfect. Now that we have loaded in the model, we want to set up the canvas. So think of the canvas as the starting div in the 3D world. You cannot display Three.js properties within a div. If you tried putting some ambient lighting here, like this, it wouldn't work. But if you render a canvas right here, coming from React 3 Fiber, then you can start using all of these properties. So let's add a basic fill light with an intensity of about 0.3. Once again, we can play with that very soon. And right below it, I'll add an environment coming from React.js with a preset set to city. So there are actually a couple of presets that you can choose from to load your elements within. This city environment will add specific ambient lighting to achieve a realistic scene reflection. It makes metal and glossy surfaces look real with minimal setup. Then we're gonna wrap everything in a floating animation. So I'll say float coming from React.js, and within it, I'll wrap a group, and within that group, I will render a primitive, specifically an object of scene.scene. There we go. So we can already start seeing some logos right here, but you can see that they're not looking that good. It's bad actually. So let's modify the float. I'll give it a speed equal to 5.5. And now you can see they're moving around kinda. I'll also set the rotation intensity to 0.5. So they're moving a bit slower. And I'll also give it a float intensity of around 0.9. So now they're floating even more subtly. But again, you can totally change this. You can increase the rotation intensity to 1 or maybe even 2 if you really want them to move around, or keep it a bit more subtle. Next, we can also play with the group by giving it a scale equal to, you can make it 2, you can make it 3. Of course, it's gonna be too big. So I decided to provide a scale already within the model. So you can just say model.scale, which is gonna scale all of these accordingly because some are bigger and some are smaller by default. So this is coming directly from the index of the constants, where you can see that scale is 1 for React because it's just the right size. But for example, Python was too large, so I lowered it down a bit. And the Node.js was too small, so I had to increase the scale significantly. We can also do the same thing with rotation. So I'll say rotation is equal to model.rotation. Perfect. So now they're all facing right toward the user. As you can see, the float component is pretty cool. It's a utility from React.js library used to create a simple animation of the model floating in space. And what do you say that we also apply some additional light to make it look a bit more intentional, let's say. Below the ambient light, which you can see, we can also play with it. If I lower the intensity to 0, well, you cannot really see the difference. But if I do it to 1, they're gonna shine really bright, which we don't really need. So I'll keep it very low. But next, we can add a directional light, position it around 555. Of course, we have to spell it correctly so our app doesn't break. Directional. And I'll set the intensity to 1. Again, makes a little difference. You cannot really see it a lot with the React logo, but if you pay attention to the Node.js logo, you'll see how the corners shine just a bit brighter. And you'll see it even more once we allow you to move the model around or orbit it around. For that, we'll use the orbit controls. We have already used it before, so you can just say orbit controls and just pass the enable zoom set to false because we don't want to zoom in. We just want to be able to move them around. And check this out. Just like that, you can move this logo around and see it in all different lights. Great. Now there's just one tweak I want to do, and that is to change the color of this Three.js logo. Originally, it is black, but it's not really looking good alongside our background. So what do you say that we tweak it just a tiny bit? I'll add a use effect, which will allow us to apply a specific effect as our components load, just initially on mount, and we want to do it whenever the scene changes. So if we load the scene later on, then we want to apply to a specific scene. I'll then say if model.name, oh, and don't forget to import use effect coming from React. That's very important. So now if model.name is triple equal to interactive developer, in that case, we want to set the scene.traverse. So we want to traverse a child element of that scene, and we want to check if child.isMesh and if child.name is triple equal to object_5. It took me some time to find it, but basically we're targeting that specific model of Three.js. Then I want to set the child material to be equal to new 3.mesh standard material, and I want to pass in a color of white. And to be able to use this 3, make sure to import everything as 3 from 3. Perfect. So if you do this, you can see that we can now change the color, or we can specifically target the material of this specific mesh. You can change it to red, but you have to reload the screen. There we go. But of course, we're going to go with white. It looks very good on our background. There we go. This is nice. Now, it's possible that maybe you don't know Python and you're wondering how you can replace this for some other technology that you want to include here. Don't worry, I'm going to teach you how to do just that very soon. But before that, there's just one little part missing from this section. And that are, of course, animations. So let's go back to the TechStack component and let's animate these icons one by one. I'll of course use the use GSAP hook coming from GSAP React. We will target it like this. And within it, I'll say GSAP, which we have to import, of course. So import GSAP from GSAP. Oh, I think it has to be within curly braces, actually. So I'll say GSAP.from2. What do I want to animate? I want to animate the tech card. At the start, I want to move the card down by 50 pixels and set the opacity to 0. And then at the end, I wanted to move the card back to the top. I want to reset the opacity to 1 throughout the duration of 1 second. Ease can be set to power2.inout, which we used before as well. Stagger can be 0.2, which means that each animation will happen 0.2 seconds after the other. And then we can also add a scroll trigger. And we want to trigger it once we get to the skills section. And we want to start it once we reach the top center part of the screen. So now if you reload and start scrolling down, you can see how they will all load one after another. But of course, that looks even better on desktop. So if you reload and go to the bottom, check this out. 0.2 seconds for each one. Let me show you one more time. There we go. So they all load from the bottom to the top, and they also go from opacity 0 to opacity 1. And you can see them all like this. This is looking great. You can also spin them around super fast. That's cool. And I guess the question is, what if you don't know Python? Well, I prepared an additional part of this section for you, so you can replace this with any other static image. Or no, it doesn't have to be static. If you want to take some time and search the web for some other 3D icons of technologies that you know, go ahead. Maybe go to Sketchfab and search for something like, I don't know, Next.js. But it might be hard to find the white version of the Next.js logo. Or maybe you want to add something else. If you can find a 3D model for it, just plug it in, point to its path. So head over to the constants, index.js, and just add it to the models, point to that 3D file, most likely with a GLB extension, and load it in. But maybe you won't be able to find 3D icons for all of these different technologies. So let me show you how we can make it work with the regular images. I'll head back to the TechStack, and I want to go after we finish mapping over these icons, and I'll add a new part. I'll once again map over the TechStack images this time, because I also prepared some images for you. I'll say .map, we get an individual icon, and for each icon, we want to display a div. This div will have a class name equal to, very similar to what we had above. So let me actually copy it. This div right here, and I will paste it here. Within it, we can display a self-closing div with a class name equal to tech card animated BG as before. And we can open up a div that'll act as the content wrapper. So I'll say tech card content. And then within it, a div that'll have a class name of tech icon wrapper, still the same as above. But the only difference is that here, now we can display a regular image. So source of icon dot image path instead of a model. And then right below it, we can render another div that'll have a class name of padding X and W full. And it'll render a p tag that'll render the icon dot name. So if you save this, you'll see that just below, we have an image variation of the same thing. Now, is this one better? Well, of course it is. And for some, you can have 3D models, but for others, if you cannot find the logo in the 3D format, then you can use this section right here, because this is much easier to replace. You can go to Constants, TechStack Images, and just download the PNG image, put it in the path, and then change the name, map over it, and you're good. I got you covered. I know that you guys know so many technologies, and I wanted to make this portfolio as customizable as possible for you. So for now, I'm going to use my TechStack 3D models, but you can opt for using just regular images in case you want to have a consistent showcase of the tech stack that you specifically know. And that brings us to the end of the tech stack section, which looks great on mobile as well as it does on desktop. So in the next section, let's focus on the testimonial section, allowing you to brag yourself a bit, not by saying good things about yourself, but by showcasing what other people have to say about you. The testimonial section is pretty simple, yet as you start hovering over it, you'll see that it is pretty cool. I mean, the goal of your websites is not to be flashy. Things don't need to jump around. They have to be minimal, but still they have to showcase what you're capable of, which is exactly what we do with this simple testimonial section. A cool thing about it is, of course, this border that we have implemented, and an even cooler thing is just how quickly we'll be able to get it implemented now that we already have this reusable card. Let me show you. I'll create a new section within the sections folder, and I'll call it Testimonials.jsx. I'll run RAFCE and import it within our app.jsx right below the tech stack. I'll head over into it and start implementing the layout. First, I'll wrap everything in a semantic section tag with an ID of testimonials so we can scroll to it from the navbar, and I'll give it a class name equal to flex-center and section-padding so it has some nice space to breathe. Next, I'll render a div that'll wrap our title. So let me give it a class name equal to wfull, hfull, on medium devices, a padding x of 10, and typically a padding x of 5. And within it, I'll render a reusable title header component with a title of what people say about me. And then I'll add a subtitle. Maybe we render an emoji of a star and then say client feedback highlights. And if you scroll down, looks good and is consistent with other sections we have on the screen. But now is the time that we render the grid of these cards. We'll use a multi-column layout, similar to this masonry style card layout that you often see on these websites like Pinterest, where you have images coming in at different heights within different columns. It creates this visually interesting layout that says, hey, look at how much content there is. It is basically infinite because you can only see half of this card here, which means there's more at the top, and you can only see half of this card here, which means that there's more at the bottom. And you want to have a similar feel with your testimonial grid as well to let people know that there's just so much good things to say about you. So below the title, I'll render a div that'll have a class name equal to on large devices, give me 3 columns, on medium devices, give me 2 columns, otherwise give me 1 column, and give me some margin top of about 16. Within it, we can say testimonials dot map, where we get each individual testimonial. And for each one, for now, we can render, well, let's do testimonial dot review. So I'll say p tag and render testimonial dot review. Of course, make sure to import testimonials from the constants index and give each one a name, a mention, maybe to their socials, their actual review, and a path to the image. Of course, you'll have to take some time to go through these and actually change them to the feedback that you were given. Hopefully working with you was even better than working with me. So if you do that, you'll be able to see this scattered feedback right here. But now we want to display it in a very nice layout. And doing that will be super easy. We just have to reuse the glow card. Remember that card that we used right before? Here. We'll just reuse it. Let me show you how. I will wrap everything in a glow card, and I'll pass in some children, specifically a div that has a class name of flex, items-center, and a gap of 3. And here I can say test for now. If you do that, the website will break because you also have to pass a prop to the glow card of card is equal to testimonial so that it knows what to render. Now, if you scroll down, you'll be able to see 5 different cards that all say test at the bottom, but already half of it is done. We have 5 stars and the reviews from the testimonial are getting passed over to the card. The only remaining part is to show who gave us that feedback. So I'll create another div within this inner div that'll contain an image with a source of testimonial.img path with an alt tag equal to testimonial.name. There we go. So we can see different people right now. We can create another div right below it that'll render a p tag with a class name equal to font-bold. And this one can say testimonial name. I now see that we're repeating ourselves too much. Testimonial image path, name, and so on. So let me just destructure those values. Image path, name, and mentions. And now you don't have to repeat yourself here. You can just say image path. Here you can say name. Here, where you're rendering a p tag, you can also render a name. But now you'll have to pass all of these within an object to the card because we no longer have access to the original testimonial. So we have to pass all of them. Name, mentions, review, and image path. But I think the glow card itself only uses a couple of things. It uses the review. Yeah, that's it. So we just need to pass over a review right here, which we get over from the card. If I save this and scroll to the bottom, you can see that we still have 5 stars, the review, and now we also have the photo and the name of the guy. But to increase the credibility even further, we can render another p tag here with a class name of text white 50, and we can render the mention of that guy or gal, which gives us their socials. So if somebody wants to verify whether this guy is a real guy, well, then they would have to maybe check them out on Twitter or something like that. Most developers nowadays have active Twitter profiles. Also, I noticed that we're missing some space in between the cards vertically on mobile devices. So if you head over into the glow card, we can add some additional classes to it, such as a margin bottom of 5, and also break inside a void column. This is a special CSS property that sets how page, column, or region breaks should behave inside a generated box. It is perfect just for this use case where you have different cards, one on top of another. So this is great. And with that, we're actually done with the testimonial section. So far, we have only seen it on mobile, but now check it out on desktop. We have this nice layout where this card appears to be taking some more space than this one and so on. And the more cards you add with different heights of the content, the better it'll look like. Remember that masonry Pinterest grid? If you head over into the testimonials and maybe duplicate a couple of these right here and save it, you can see how it adapts to the amount of content we have. So go ahead and collect those positive testimonials. It's always great to have some experts vouch for you. With that said, we're getting very, very close to the bottom of our page. Nonetheless, it's going to be an amazing finishing touch, where we'll implement this fully functional form that'll allow other people to contact you, and then we'll implement another super cool artistic 3D model that basically says, hey, I'm going to be at my desk, feel free to send me an email. So let's do that next. Last but not least section of the portfolio, and maybe the most important one, because without it, how would people be able to reach you to hire you? So let's get started with implementing the contact section. Back in our project, the last section we implemented was the testimonial section. So now we have to add the contact section just below. And recently, I saw that JetBrains released a new coding agent that can speed up our workflow. So I wanted to test it a bit when creating this contact section. I'll press Command-Shift-P and open up Junie. That's the name of our assistant. If you're using WebStorm and you want to test it out with me, I'll leave the link down in the description. But for now, let's try to be precise. Let's say create a new section called Contact, import it within the app, and within it, use the class names that we typically wrap all of our sections with, and also add a title header component right within it that says something about contacting us. I'll turn on the Brave mode and give it a go. It is working right now, and it actually outlined a plan. Examine the current structure, look at the title header component, since we need to use it, create a new contacts file in the sections directory, implement the contact component with appropriate class names and title header, and then import and add the contact component to app.js. So right now it's actually doing all of that. It's opening all of these things, editing different pages. It looks like it actually created a new contact section right here within sections, contact. And it ended up using the title header right here, alongside with some other information. Pretty cool. Now it's editing the app and adding the context section right within it by following the same structure we used before. And it told us exactly what it did right here. So we can roll back or just call it a day. Now, if I save this and give Junie some time to rest, let's see what we have. So it looks like it did exactly what I asked it to do. It created a new section right here within the sections directory called Contact. It gave it an ID so we can scroll to it alongside some default class names. And it also used our title header component with a title as well as a sub. And it even added an emoji because it noticed that that's exactly what we're doing for other sections. And then, since I wasn't precise on what we want to see below, it created a generic structure where somebody can actually copy this email and send it to us. Pretty cool stuff that it was able to do all of this, not just generate code, but also create files for us. If you didn't end up using Junie just yet, that's totally fine. You can pause this video and copy this code right here where it generated this title header. But can we take it a step further? Can we maybe get it to create a layout right here where we're going to have a form, and then also it'll create a new component on the right side that'll allow us to display this great looking 3D model? Well, let's give it a shot. I'll once again open up Junie and say something like, within the context section, just below the title header. And by the way, I haven't used Junie before, so I don't know how precise I have to be, so better to be as descriptive as possible. But maybe it works with less info as well, I don't know. So right here, I'll say within the context section, just below the title header, create a layout with a grid 12 calls class, where on the left side, we'll have a form that has labels and inputs for the name, the email, and the message, and of course, a submit button. You can find some classes within the index.css to keep it consistent. And then on the right side of that form, create and display a new component called Contact Experience, within which will later on display a Three.js canvas by importing a computer optimized .glb file and immediately add some lights and meshes so we can see it on the screen. This is a super hard task, and I'm not expecting Junie to get it right on the first time, but who knows? Let's see. I love testing these AI tools as they just make you that much more efficient of a developer. There we go. It's researching everything just to get some context, and then it'll try to create stuff. Okay, looks like it started editing the contact experience part. So if we head over to our components, we can see the contact experience, and it is writing code right now, already putting in the canvas and some lights and meshes in the environment. Looks like it's keeping in mind what we did for the hero section, and it's done. Junie says, a grid layout was implemented in the contact section featuring a form on the left for name, email, and message inputs, alongside a new contact experience component displaying a 3D computer model using Three.js on the right. The implementation is error-free and all components function as intended. This is super cool, but let's see if that is really the case. It looks like it actually generated a form that is super similar to the one on the final application. Just a couple of tweaks and it'll be there. And it also left some space right here on the right to display our canvas, but we'll have to make a couple of tweaks to actually get it to show. So let's explore what it did within the code. If I head over to the app, we still have the contact section. It created some states, handle changes as well. Oh, so actually we can already type within this form. That's super cool. And we have a form where we can actually submit that data. And after that, we have our div for the left side of the form. Let's go through it together. So if you haven't used Junie, we can actually go ahead and write it together ourselves manually. Okay, first things first. Right below our title header, we have a div that has a class name of margin top of 16 and grid 12 columns. Then we have a contact form left side that has a div where we have on extra large devices call span of 6. In this case, we can maybe make it 5 so that then the right side takes a larger portion of the screen. And I'll also remove this part. We won't need it, as later on as we continue developing our layout, we'll make sure that it all fits nicely if we're on mobile devices. So within this div, I'll create another div that'll have a class name equal to flex-center, card-border, rounded-XL, and a padding of 10. And within it, I want to bring my form. So let me copy the form and just bring it a couple of steps up right here within this div. If you now save this, you'll notice that it looks something like this. Make sure to give it a class name equal to w-full, flex-call, and a gap of 7. And let's look into the top part. We have an ID of contact, flex center, section padding. We have a div that has a class name of wfull, hfull, on medium devices padding x of 10, and typically padding x of 5. Then, just below the title header, we have this div that then contains the left side of the form. Let's just make sure that the right side is not included within that div. So for the 3D experience, I'll give it an extra large call span 7, so it takes a bit more space. I'll remove the call span 12, and I'll set the min h to 96. So now you'll see that this will take 7 out of 12 spaces, and this form will take 5 out of 12. But on mobile devices, it'll actually take the full width of the screen. I can actually explain that by providing a border 2 and border solid red. And you can see that this takes this part of the screen right now. But if I do the same thing for the bottom one, so for the right side, it'll look something like this, where now it takes the bottom part of the screen. But as soon as you expand it, you can see that this takes 5 out of 12, and this one takes 7 out of 12, which means that our layout is great. So I'll remove those borders, and we can continue with the rest of the code. I know that it's possible that you might not have had this code at the bottom. So if this is getting a bit more complicated, I'll also provide a complete contact.jsx file within the video kit, so you can copy it and have this form right here. But with that said, don't worry, because we can also type it out together. Next, we have the form that has a class name of wfull, flex-call, and a gap of 7. And within it, we have a div. I don't think this div will need a class name for a margin bottom. We can just use the gaps to provide that spacing. We have a label for HTML4 for the name. We have an input that has a type of text, an ID of name, a placeholder of your name, and some parameters that we need to manage its value. After that, we have another div that has a label for email and also some properties for the email. And finally, we have another one right at the bottom that's managing the message property, which is actually a text area. Finally, after that div containing the text area, we have the button with a type submit. And in this case, we can style it a bit differently by rendering a div right within the button that'll have a class name equal to CTA button group. Within it, we will display a div that'll have a class name of BG circle. And you can notice that I'm recreating the button we had at the top. That's because this one will be an actual submit button, whereas the previous button was not really a button. Technically, it was an anchor tag that we used to scroll to some places. Right below this div that says BG circle, I'll render a p tag that'll render a text of send message, and it'll have a class name equal to text. And below it, I'll render a div with a class name equal to arrow dash wrapper, and it'll render a self-closing image with a source of /images /arrow dash down dot svg and an alt tag of arrow. If you save that, we'll once again have this beautiful button that allows you to send a message. Then, if we go a bit down below the div, below the button, and below the form, and below two more divs, we get to the second part of the screen. Just a simple div with a min height taking 7 out of 12 spaces on extra large devices, and within it, we can display another div within which we'll put this contact experience, which you might not have yet if you haven't used Juni, but don't worry because we're going to create it together. This div will have a class name equal to wfull for full width, hfull for full height, and a background color. Let's make this a bright orange color that you saw in the preview of CD7C2E. If you save it, oh, it looks like we already get some kind of a canvas right here, or at least a background color. Let's make it a hover cursor grab. So we give a user an indication that they can actually move around this 3D experience. Let's round up the corners a bit by saying rounded 3XL, and let's set the overflow to hidden. If you save this, this is looking great, but it looks like nothing's on the screen. What if I expand it? Oh, still nothing. But if I drag and drop, oh, would you look at that? The 3D model is actually here, but we are at the bottom of the table. So it looks like Juni was actually able to find a 3D model within our public folder and set up Three.js, React 3 Fiber, and React 3 Dre with orbit controls to allow us to see this model. It messed up the positioning a bit, but that's totally okay because we can easily fix that. So let's head over into the contact experience, or create it for the first time if you haven't already, and let's see what we have over here. As before, I found this model on Sketchfab completely for free, so you can download it and use it from here. But this time, I'll actually teach you another strategy of how you can auto-optimize your models. Check this out. If you head over to the public folder and head over to models, you'll see that we have a computer optimized as well as the computer optimized transformed. If you right-click it and open it within your file system, you'll notice that the computer optimized has 486 kilobytes, whereas the computer optimized transformed only has 40. That is more than a 10-fold optimization. Huge. So let me show you how you can achieve that. As before, we'll use this gltf JSX package, but this time we'll also apply a T flag which transforms the asset for the web. Draco prune resize. It'll automatically optimize the model. So within our code, just open up a terminal, cd into public, and then cd into models. Then run npx gltf jsx computer-optimized .glb-t and press enter. You'll see that this will create a new computer optimized .jsx file. So move it into components and then models. Then head over into it to see what was generated and rename it over to computer. You'll see that it's getting the nodes and the materials by using the use GLTF computer optimized transformed, but make sure to add /models right here before it. So models computer optimized. And then we want to do the same thing right here at the bottom, /models /computer optimized. And now it has two different meshes to which we can also add some shadows. So say cast shadows as well as receive shadows. This will have that special animated effect on our model. Now head back over to the contact experience file and import that model. Even though what Junie created was totally working, I'll delete it just because we now optimized this 3D model even further. Maybe Junie would have been able to do that as well if I told it to. But for now, within this canvas, simply create a group, give it a scale of like 0.03 because it is a big model, and let's change the position to something like 0, -1.5, and then -2. I found this position to work the best. And of course, let's say cast shadow. Within this group, you can render the computer model coming from components models. So in my case, if I go back to the application, I can now see this beautiful model right here with a lot of light and not too many shadows, at least not yet. But hey, it's here. For you, it might not be there yet as we haven't added those additional things, but don't worry as we're gonna do that right now. First, I wanna look into orbit controls. We will set enable zoom to false and set the min polar angle to math pi over 5 and max polar angle to math pi over 2. This one limits how far the user can rotate down, and this one limits how far the user can rotate up. So we don't want to allow them to go too much up or too much down because then the scene doesn't make any sense. And now, of course, we want to play with the lights. I'll remove this environment as we don't need it in this case. There we go. So now this looks a bit more dull. But we want to create a cozy and warm environment. So let's play with the ambient light with the intensity of 0.5, a color of hash FFF 4E6. That's going to give it that warm tone. Let's also play with a directional light of something like 553 with an intensity of 2.5 and a color of hash FFD 9B3. Okay, we're getting there. And instead of this spotlight, I'll add another directional light, this time with a position equal to 591. There we go. Cast shadow will be turned on to true. Intensity will be also set to 2.5. And we'll add a color of hash FFD 9B3. These lights will add that warmth. And finally, to actually cast shadows, we cannot do it in this universe because this is just a orange background, right? So it's not reflecting any shadows. To actually receive shadows, we need to create a large flat surface under the model. So we have something to cast the shadows on. So right below this computer, below the group, create another group with a scale property of 111 and a mesh that will receive shadows with a position of 0, -1.5 and 0, and a rotation of -math.pi over 2 and then 0, 0. I found those values to work the best. And within it, we can display the plane geometry. You can kind of see it right here at the bottom. So we're basically adding the floor. I'll give it args of 30, 30, which is going to make it much larger. So we have more space to cast shadows. And I'll also give it a mesh standard material with a color of hash A46B2D. Check that out. That's much better, and you can kind of see it in the distance, right, where it ends. But if you're just looking at the middle of the screen, you won't be able to tell the difference. But we still can't see any shadows, can we? Let's head over into our computer model to see if maybe we didn't cast the shadow somewhere. I'll actually zoom it in so we can see it better. Oh, I made a mistake. This was supposed to be cast shadow, not shadows, because a mesh can only cast one shadow if it's a singular object, and also receive shadow. So you'll have to fix this on a couple of places. So now that we know that that is good, we can also take a look at our lights and everything that we have within this canvas. This ambient light looks good to me. Besides, the light is maybe a bit too yellow. So let's say 4E6, there we go. So now we have this more natural white color. And you can see the shadows are being applied on this computer right here, or rather on the table. It's just that they're not being applied on the floor. Looking at the directional light, we have a position of 553, intensity of 2.5, and some nice color. This is looking good. And another directional light, which is also looking good to me. Finally, we have a group for the computer with a scale and its position, and it says cast shadow. Below it, we render the floor. So here I see receive shadows. No, this was supposed to be receive shadow. There we go. So now this scene really pops and comes to life because something in our minds is telling us, hey, this cannot be right. This is flying in the air. We need to see some shadows because the light is so bright, so there has to be shadow. Which just shows you how important shadows are. But with that in mind, we have now developed this Get in Touch with Me session with a form, as well as this nice looking 3D desk setup, which has this some sort of a cartoonish look with nice shadows. So what do you say that in the next lesson, we make the form functional? So people looking at your portfolio can actually send you emails. To make our form functional and to allow other users to email us, we'll use Email.js. It is completely free and super simple to set up. So just head over to Email.js, create a free account or sign in if you have an account already. And once you're in, you should be able to see something that looks like this. Add a new service, choose your email provider. In this case, I'll go with Gmail. Give it a name and copy the service ID. Head back over to your app and create a new .env file. Within it, say vite_app_email.js_service_ID and paste the service ID you just copied. Then click Connect Account and continue. It'll ask you whether you want to allow it to send emails on your behalf. Select yes. It'll say connected and click Create Service. Once the service has been added, head over to Email Templates, create a new email template. You can leave it as a simple contact template. Click Create, and you'll have to head over to Settings and copy the template ID. Then, within your env file, create another environment variable called vite_app email.js template ID and simply paste the ID you just copied. Then head over to Account within the sidebar and copy your public ID. This one you can add as vite_app email.js public key. So you should have 3 keys in your envs. Now, back within our contact section, we'll have to somehow get access to the values within our form fields. And thankfully, Juni has already done that for us. We have created a new use state with name, email, and message fields. And we're also handling the changes whenever user types anything on these fields. Just to make it a bit more responsive, we can also add the loading state. So const loading, set loading, at the start set to use state false, and then we can update the button with the loading state. So right below where we have our button, which is right here, the button can be disabled if we're currently loading. So I'll say disabled if loading. And we can also change the text to say if we're loading, then display sending ... else display send message. Finally, we can head over to handle submit. First, you have to prevent the default behavior of the browser to reload once you submit a form. We don't want that within modern applications. And now that we have collected all of these values within form data, what do you say that we go ahead and hook it up to email.js keys that we just got from their dashboard. To do that, you'll have to install a new package by running npm i @email.js/browser. And then you can import it at the top by saying import email.js from @email.js/browser. And then within handle submit, we want to take the data that we have, but we'll make it into an asynchronous function because sending an email does take some time. So instead of console logging, I'll just open up a try and catch block. In case something goes wrong, we'll get an error, and I'll say console log email.js error, and maybe we can also display that error right here next to it. And then we can also add a finally block, which will be executed no matter whether we succeed or fail with that request. And here we can just reset the loading to false because we want to stop it even when there's an error. And then in the try, we want to use email.js functionality to send the form. First, we will trigger the loading. So at the top, I'll say set loading is set to true. And then here, we'll say await email.js.sendForm, and you want to pass all of the keys that we saved. Import.meta.env.vite app email.js service ID. That's the first one. You want to duplicate it. The second one is the template ID. So how do you want your email to look like? And the third one is the public key. That's everything you need to send over an email. Finally, we want to reset the form after submission. So I'll bring this up right here. And that's more or less it. This should successfully send an email. So what do you say that we go ahead and test it out? I've already filled in some information right here, but the question is, where are we actually taking in this form data and passing it into the send form? See, the way in which it works is first you pass the service ID, then the template ID, then the form, and finally the options. So right here, after your second parameter, you want to pass in the form data. Specifically, you want to pass a reference to the form. So let's create a new reference right at the top by saying const form ref is equal to useRef, coming from React, at the start set to null, and we can attach this reference to a form. So just scroll down to where we start with our form and give this form a ref equal to form ref. And now right here, we can pass form ref dot current, which will contain all the information from the form. So reload the app, head over to the contact me. Let's say that your employer is contacting you from john@doe.com, and they're going to say you're hired. Finally, click send a message. It says sending. And what happened? It looks like I passed the wrong template ID. So back on email.js, maybe I didn't proceed with fully completing my form. I'll click create. Oh yeah, I didn't save it. So I'll have to head over to settings, copy the ID one more time, re-add it to my envs right here, and then don't forget to click save. Yep, this is what matters. Now, if you reload the page, scroll to the contact, and try to send out the email. The autofill also works. We're going to say you're hired and send the message. Sending, you can see that the form actually get cleared, which means that it successfully got sent. And if you head over to your email provider, you'll see a new email saying a message by Adrian has been received. Respond at your earliest convenience. You are hired. And the only problem that we have right now is that we don't know who to respond to. What is the email that they left? So if you head over to your template content, alongside displaying the name and the message, right below, we can also render the email. So just use a double curly brace and render the email variable right here, save it. And if we once again try to send out an email, this time on the big screen, testing, the email arrives in a second, and now it also contains the email that you can respond to. Perfect. We've got it all covered. So to finish it off, let's also add a simple footer, because this form and the 3D model really need some breathing room at the bottom of the screen. We'll do something super simple that looks like this, where people can maybe read a bit more about us. I would suggest that you point this to your blog and then go ahead and implement it. Write about your learning journey, because you don't really have terms and conditions. Also, put your professional profiles, okay? I wouldn't actually advise going for Instagram or Facebook, but X or LinkedIn or the links to your blogs, totally go for that, and then put your name here. To implement this footer, I'll head over into the sections folder and create a new file called footer.jsx, run rafce, and import it right within our app by simply rendering a self-closing footer component. We can then head over into it and wrap it in a semantic footer tag that'll have a class name of footer, which will automatically give it some room to breathe. Within it, we can render a div that'll have a class name equal to footer-container. And then within it, another div that'll have a class name of flex, flex-call, and justify-center, within which we can display an anchor tag with an href pointing to just /. And this one can say, visit my blog. So if you really want to take this portfolio further, try implementing a blog section as well, or point to your Medium blog maybe. Below that div, render another div. This one will have a class name of socials. And here you can map over your social images by saying social images.map, where you get each individual image. So I can say img, and for each one, render an anchor tag, which will then render an image with a source of img.img path. If you do that, you should be able to see those 4 icons. And these social images are coming from constants, so you can totally change their name or even delete or add some new platforms that you're using. And of course, put your URL right there. Let's give this anchor tag a class name equal to icon, a target of _blank, so it opens up within a new tab, an href pointing to the img.url, and since we're mapping over it, also a key of img.url because it's unique. Finally, we can head below this div of socials and add another div for the right side of the footer with a class name of flex, flex-call, justify-center, within which we can have a p tag that'll have a class name equal to text-center, and on medium devices, text-end, and within it, we can display that copyright sign, and then create a new date and get the current full year. So that way, even the next year, this will be updated. You can put your name right here and say something like all rights reserved. Well, I give you the rights right here to use this as a portfolio. Now we could also align this visit my blog to the center. So I'll say items center. There we go. So it looks good on mobile devices, but if we expand it, it gives just the right amount of space right here for desktop devices too. But here I actually want to keep it on the left corner. So I can say on medium devices and larger, items start, which is going to put it here, but on mobile, it'll be centered. And that brings us to the end of the footer and almost to the end of the entire build. One thing that I don't like right now is that we haven't changed the favicon nor the title. I want it to look something a bit more like this. So to change it, head over to the index.html file right here and change the title to something like your name and m dash semicolon, do 2 of these, and then say portfolio. This will form this nice Adrian longline portfolio. Also, we just have to replace this favicon, which is the default v1, which everybody has, with the updated favicon. So point the path of the link to /images /fav.png. If you save it, you'll see my initials right here. But of course, I don't want you to use my initials. So on the right side of the design, I prepared this part right here that says icons, where you can change some of the logos or some other aspects of your portfolio. For example, you can change your initials right here. So to be able to change it, you'll have to duplicate it. So just say duplicate to your drafts, and then you'll be able to edit and export this icon. Once you do that, you can just put it to your public folder, point to it right here, and then it'll update for your portfolio. And with that said, we are done with building our amazing portfolio. So the last step we have to do is to get it deployed to the internet so we can share it with everyone. And we're back on Hostinger's dashboard. I already got the domain name with my hosting, and if you purchased and selected yours, you should be able to see a page that looks something like this. If you didn't get the hosting or the domain name yet, you can do that by clicking the link down in the description. Once you find your website or your domain name, click File Manager. Then head over into your public HTML and delete the default PHP, because here we're going to upload our website. So go back to your application, stop it from running and close all of the terminals, and just run npm run build. This will build an optimized production build of your application. There we go. Took just 3 seconds. If you check out your project, you'll notice that there's a new dist, as in distribution folder, that contains everything about your website. So right-click it and open it up within your Finder or File Explorer. Then go into it, select everything within it, and drag and drop it right here within your H panel. There we go. Now close the H panel. You'll be redirected back to your domain and click on it. And that's it. It loaded instantly with the proper favicon, title, and even an HTTPS certificate. Just try reloading it and see how fast it is. And take a second to admire everything you've built. Having this custom domain name, SSL certificate, and fast load times definitely makes you stand out in the crowd. And let's also test out our email functionality. Test from production. I'll go ahead and send it, and I got it in a second. Perfect. And there you have it. You have successfully built your own 3D personal portfolio. Congratulations. Oh yeah, and let's not forget that it is fully mobile responsive. I mean, just look at it with these nice looking timeline animations. It is just amazing. Since you came to the end of this one, I know you love Three.js and I know you want to get better at it. So the only next step that makes sense for you right now after watching this video is to check out the Ultimate Three.js course, live right now on JS Mastery Pro. Here, we'll dive super deep into every single Three.js property that we covered in this video and so much more. From different geometries, planes, modifying the 3D world and lights and shadows and so much more, we'll explore everything that Three.js has to offer. So check it out, the link is in the description. With that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on JS Mastery Pro.